Hey everyone, so picture this. What if the guy who spent his entire life saving everyone became the person they needed saving from? I'm talking about Naruto Uzumaki going full villain, and not just any villain. This isn't some oops I got corrupted by evil chakra nonsense. This is Naruto deciding that friendship and understanding failed him, so the only way to protect people is to control them completely. Imagine someone with the power to reshape mountains and the unwavering belief that he's doing the right thing, no matter how many lives it costs. The terrifying part? His logic actually makes sense. Every argument he makes, every justification for his actions, you'll find yourself nodding along even as he burns villages to the ground. That's what makes him dangerous. This story takes us through his complete transformation and the desperate mission to stop him before he rewrites human nature itself. Hit that like button if you're ready for a psychological thriller that'll mess with your head, and let's jump into this masterpiece. The crater where Konoha's center once stood still smoked. Naruto knelt in the rubble, his orange jacket torn and bloodied, staring at the destruction Pain had left behind. Bodies lay scattered like broken dolls, some he recognized, others he didn't. The metallic taste of blood filled his mouth, though he wasn't sure if it was his own anymore. "We did it," he whispered to himself, voice hoarse from screaming. "We actually did it," but victory felt hollow when surrounded by so much death. Naruto pushed himself to his feet, legs shaking from exhaustion. The battle with Pain, with Nagato, had pushed him beyond every limit he thought he had. He tapped into the Nine Tails' power deeper than ever before, letting that burning chakra consume him until he barely remembered being human. And somehow, impossibly, he'd won. So why doesn't it feel like winning? A weak cough made him spin around. There, half buried under a chunk of concrete, lay Hinata. Her dark hair was matted with blood, her pale eyes unfocused and dim. "Hinata!" Naruto scrambled over the debris, his exhaustion forgotten. He lifted the concrete slab. It should have been too heavy, but adrenaline made him strong. Hinata's breathing was shallow, each breath seeming like it might be her last. Hey, stay with me," he said, gently lifting her head. "You're gonna be fine. Sakura will fix you up, and then you can lecture me about being reckless again, okay?" Hinata's lips moved, but no sound came out. Naruto leaned closer. "What is it? Don't try to talk, just Naruto-kun." Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm glad you're safe. Don't talk like that. You're not going anywhere." But even as he said it, Naruto could feel her body growing cold in his arms. The warmth was leaving her, like watching a candle burn down to nothing. "I need to tell you something," she managed, each word a struggle. "I've loved you for so long, since we were children. I wanted to be strong like you, wanted to stand beside you." Naruto felt something break inside his chest. Not physical, something deeper. "Hinata, you are strong. You're the strongest person I know. Remember when you stood up to Pain? You saved me." She smiled then, that gentle smile he'd seen 1,000 times but never really understood. "I'm sorry I wasn't stronger." "No, don't." Her eyes fluttered closed. The rise and fall of her chest slowed, then stopped altogether. Hinata. He shook her gently, then harder. "Come on, wake up." This isn't funny, but she was gone. The girl who'd always believed in him, who'd seen something worth loving in the village outcast, who'd jumped between him and 6 paths of pain without hesitation, she was dead. Naruto held her close and screamed until his throat felt raw. I need to explain what happened next carefully. This is where everything starts to go wrong, but it's subtle at first. Naruto's always been someone who draws strength from others' belief in him. Losing Hinata like this, after she confessed her love, creates a wound that doesn't heal properly. The funeral was 3 days later. Half the village turned out, dressed in black, speaking in hushed voices about sacrifice and heroism. Naruto stood at the back, still wearing his torn orange jacket. He hadn't changed clothes since the battle. Hadn't slept much either. Tsunade spoke about Hinata's bravery, about how she'd given her life to protect others. The words washed over Naruto like background noise. He kept staring at the wooden casket, trying to convince himself this was all some terrible dream. After the ceremony, people approached him. They patted his shoulder, called him a hero, thanked him for saving the village. Their words felt meaningless, hollow. "You did good, kid," said one of the shop owners who used to chase him away as a child. "Real good." Naruto nodded and said nothing. What was he supposed to say? That he'd trade every life he'd saved for just one more conversation with Hinata. As the crowd dispersed, Naruto found himself walking aimlessly through the village. Construction crews were already working to rebuild, their hammering and sawing creating a constant din. People were moving on, getting back to normal, like nothing had happened. like she'd never existed at all. He ended up at Ikaraku Ramen, sliding onto his usual stool. Chuchai, the owner, looked pleased to see him. "Naruto, I heard what you did, you saved us all." The old man's eyes were bright with gratitude. "This one's on the house." "What'll it be?" "Just miso, extra pork." "Coming right up." As Chuchai worked, humming contentedly, Naruto stared at his reflection in the polished counter. He looked older somehow, hollow around the eyes. Two villagers took seats a few stools down. They didn't notice him at first, or maybe they didn't care. "Crazy what happened with that demon fox kid," one of them said, voice low but not low enough. "Never thought he'd actually be useful for something." "Yeah, well, even a broken clock is right twice a day," the other replied. "Question is, can we trust it not to go berserk again? I mean, did you see the crater? That kind of power makes you think, maybe we've been going about this all wrong. Instead of shunning the damn thing, maybe we should be using it, point it at our enemies and let it loose." Naruto's hand tightened around his chopsticks until they cracked. "I heard the Hokage's thinking the same thing. About time, if you ask me. All those years of kid gloves when we could have had the ultimate weapon. Just as long as someone keeps it on a leash. Last thing we need is that monster deciding we're the enemy." They kept talking, but Naruto stopped listening. The words echoed in his head like a mantra: useful, weapon, monster, leash. This was how they saw him. This was how they'd always seen him. Not as Naruto Uzumaki, the kid who'd grown up alone and fought for their acceptance. Not as the ninja who'd just bled for their village, but as a thing. A tool to be used when convenient and caged when not. And Hinata, sweet, kind Hinata who'd loved him despite everything, was dead because of their hatred. Because they'd made him into exactly what they feared. Something that attracted violence and destruction. "Here you go," Chuchai placed a steaming bowl in front of him. "Eat up, hero." Naruto stared at the ramen. The smell made him nauseous. "Actually," he said, standing up, "I'm not that hungry anymore." He left money on the counter and walked out, leaving the bowl untouched. That night, Naruto sat on the Hokage monument, looking down at the village he'd sworn to protect. Lights twinkled in windows like stars. Peaceful, normal. The people down there were probably having dinner with their families, telling stories, laughing. None of them were thinking about Hinata. He'd spent his whole life chasing their approval, believing that if he just tried hard enough, fought strong enough, saved enough people, they'd finally see him as human. But it was never going to happen, was it? They'd made up their minds about him before he could even walk. Maybe they're right, he thought. Maybe I am a monster. The idea should have horrified him. Instead, it felt almost liberating. If he was a monster, then he didn't need their love. He didn't need to pretend their opinions mattered. He didn't need to smile and nod while they called him a weapon behind his back. A monster could do whatever it wanted. A monster could make sure no one else died the way Hinata had died, meaninglessly, as collateral damage in other people's wars. Naruto stood up, brushing dust from his jacket. When he looked down at the village again, his blue eyes had gone cold, empty, like looking into deep water with no bottom. "I'm going to save you all," he whispered to the sleeping village. "Whether you want me to or not." This ending is crucial because it shows Naruto's complete mindset shift. He's not becoming evil out of pure rage or revenge, he's becoming evil out of a twisted sense of love. He wants to protect people, but his methods are going to become increasingly extreme. That makes him more dangerous than a simple villain, because he genuinely believes he's the hero of his own story. The next morning, Naruto reported to the Hokage's office for debriefing. Tsunade looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that came from making life-or-death decisions for days on end. "Sit down, Naruto," she gestured to the chair across from her desk. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine." Tsunade studied his face. "Are you? Because losing someone close to you, especially in battle, I said I'm fine." His voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "What did you want to talk about?" Something flickered in Tsunade's eyes, concern, maybe, or recognition. She'd seen that look before, on the faces of broken shinobi who'd lost too much. "The village council wants to meet with you," she said carefully. "About your performance during the invasion." "Performance?" Naruto's head tilted slightly. "Is that what we're calling it? You saved us, Naruto, everyone knows that. But the power you displayed, the level of destruction, some people are asking questions." "What kind of questions?" Tsunade hesitated. "About whether that power can be directed, controlled, used strategically." There it was. The same conversation he'd overheard at the ramen shop, dressed up in official language. They wanted to use him, had always wanted to use him. They just hadn't been desperate enough to admit it before. "I see," Naruto said quietly, And what do you think, Granny? Should I be directed, controlled? I think you're a human being, not a weapon, but I'm not the only voice that matters anymore. She leaned forward. The world's changing, Naruto. After what happened with Pain, with Sasuke, with everything, people are scared, and scared people make dangerous decisions. Naruto nodded slowly. Yeah, they do. He stood up to leave, but Tsunade's voice stopped him at the door. Naruto, if you need to talk to someone, about Hinata, about anything, I'm here. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. For just a moment, his shoulders sagged, and he looked like the lonely kid he'd once been. She loved me, he said without turning around. Did you know that, all these years, and I never? She knew you cared about her. That matters, does it? Naruto's voice was barely audible. Does any of it matter if everyone still sees me as a monster in the end? Before Tsunade could answer, he was gone. The meeting with the village council was exactly what Naruto expected. A dozen old men and women in formal robes, sitting around a polished table, discussing him like he wasn't in the room. The boy's power has grown exponentially, said Councilman Koharu. Perhaps it's time we stopped treating him like a liability and started treating him like an asset. A dangerous asset, added Councilman Hamura. One that needs proper oversight. They talked about training programs, about missions, about ways to maximize his potential for the village's benefit. They used words like strategic deployment and controlled application of force. Naruto sat quietly through it all, hands folded in his lap, face expressionless. When they finally asked for his input, he looked up with those cold, empty eyes. I'll do whatever the village needs, he said simply. After all, that's what I'm for, right, to be useful. The council members exchanged satisfied glances. They thought they were getting exactly what they wanted. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. 3 months after Pain's attack, the 5 Kage Summit was called to address the growing threats in the ninja world. Sasuke's rampage, Akatsuki's remaining members, the power vacuum left by destroyed villages, everything was spiraling toward chaos. Naruto stood behind Tsunade's chair in the meeting hall, officially serving as her bodyguard. The other Kages had brought their strongest fighters too. Gaara had Temari, the Reikage had Darui, Mizukage Mei had Chojuro, and the elderly Tsuchikage had brought his granddaughter Kurotsuchi. But Naruto wasn't really there to guard anyone. He was there to listen, to learn, to catalog every weakness, every fear, every pressure point these so-called leaders revealed. The Akatsuki threat remains active, Tsunade was saying. We've confirmed at least 3 members are still at large, and their goals haven't changed. Goals that your village's Jinchuriki made possible, the Reikage growled, his electric chakra crackling slightly. If you kept better control of the Ninetales, careful. Naruto's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. Every head turned toward him. You're talking about people who are dead now. Show some respect. The Reikage's eyes narrowed. Boy, you don't speak to a Kage like what? Naruto stepped forward, and something in his movement made the other bodyguards tense. Like someone who just saved an entire village while you were sitting safe in your mountain fortress. Naruto, Tsunade's voice held a warning. No, it's fine, Granny. Naruto's smile was thin and cold. The Reikage wants to talk about control. Let's talk about it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Naruto's chakra wasn't flaring. If anything, it felt more controlled than usual. That made it worse somehow. You want to know what I learned fighting Pain? Naruto continued, his blue eyes moving from one Kage to another. I learned that all our enemies have one thing in common. They're products of this system. This arrangement where 5 villages pretend to cooperate while secretly preparing to destroy each other. That's how it's always been, Gaara said quietly. The balance of power keeps major wars from breaking out. Does it? Naruto tilted his head. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like all this balance does is guarantee that people keep dying in smaller, more frequent conflicts. Like my friend Hinata died because we couldn't work together against a common threat. Tsunade shot him a sharp look. This wasn't the grief-stricken boy from 3 months ago. This was someone else entirely. What are you suggesting? Asked Mei, her green eyes calculating. I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to try something new. A unified command structure. One voice making decisions instead of 5 egos protecting territory. The Tsuchikage laughed, a sound like grinding stone. And I suppose you think that voice should be yours, not mine. I'm just a weapon, remember? Naruto's smile widened, but it never reached his eyes. That's what everyone keeps telling me, but weapons need someone to wield them, someone with vision. Someone who isn't afraid to make hard choices. He was looking directly at Tsunade when he said it. This is where Naruto starts showing his true colors, not through explosive anger, but through cold manipulation. He's testing boundaries, seeing how people react to his new persona. The scary part is how logical he sounds. "You're out of line," the Raikage stood up, electricity dancing across his skin. "I don't care what you've done." "You're still just a what?" Naruto interrupted. "A Jinchuriki, a monster. Please finish your sentence. I'd hate for there to be any misunderstanding about where we all stand." The room went dead silent. Every person there had heard stories about what happened when the Nine Tails got angry, but this wasn't anger, this was something much more dangerous. "Enough," Tsunade said firmly. "We're here to discuss threats to our villages, not to insult each other's people." "Of course," Naruto said, stepping back into his position behind her chair. "My apologies, I sometimes forget my place." But the damage was done. The other cages were looking at him differently now. Not with fear of his power, but with the kind of wariness reserved for political threats. The meeting continued for another hour, covering logistics and intelligence sharing. Naruto said nothing more, but his presence filled the room like smoke. Every time someone made a point, his eyes would flick to them with that same calculating stare. When the formal session ended, the cages broke into smaller groups for private discussions. Naruto watched it all, who talked to whom, what topics made them uncomfortable, which alliances were strong and which were fragile. That's when he sensed a familiar chakra signature approaching the building. Sasuke. The confrontation happened on the roof under a starless sky. Sasuke materialized from the shadows like he'd never left, his Sharingan already active. He looked older too, harder around the edges, with new scars crossing his pale skin. "So the rumors are true," Sasuke said without preamble. "You really are here playing politics with the cages." "Sasuke." Naruto didn't turn around, still staring out at the Iron Country's snow-covered peaks. "I was wondering when you'd show up. Were you? Or were you hoping I wouldn't interfere with whatever game you're playing?" Now Naruto did turn, and Sasuke felt something cold settle in his stomach. His best friend's face was the same, but his eyes, those weren't the eyes of someone who still believed in saving everyone. "It's not a game," Naruto said simply. "It's evolution." "Evolution?" Sasuke's hand moved instinctively toward his sword. "Is that what you call abandoning everything you used to stand for?" "I haven't abandoned anything. I still want to protect people. I still want peace." Naruto stepped closer, and despite himself, Sasuke took a half step back. "I just realized that the old way doesn't work." "What old way?" "Hoping people will change, believing they'll do the right thing if you just show them enough kindness. Trusting that friendship and understanding can overcome hatred." Naruto's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. 3 months ago, I would have died for that belief." "Hinata did die for it." Sasuke's Sharingan spun faster. "Don't you dare use her death to justify." "Justify what? Looking at the world as it really is instead of how I want it to be." Naruto spread his arms wide. "Look around, Sasuke. We're at a summit where 5 leaders are supposed to cooperate against common threats, and they can barely sit in the same room without reaching for weapons. How many more people have to die before we admit this system is broken? So what, you're going to fix it? Single-handedly?" "Not single-handedly." Naruto's smile was sharp. "That's why you're here, isn't it? You've seen what I'm seeing, you know I'm right." For a moment, Sasuke said nothing. Because the terrible thing was, part of him did understand. He'd spent years watching villages destroy each other over ancient grudges. He'd seen how the cycle of hatred perpetuated itself, generation after generation. "Even if the system is broken," he said finally, "that doesn't mean we tear it down. We can reform it. Change it from within." "Can we?" Naruto pulled out a scroll from his jacket. "Take a look at this." Sasuke caught the scroll, unrolled it, and felt his blood run cold. It was a detailed intelligence report on Hidden Cloud's military capabilities, complete with troop numbers, weapon stockpiles, and defensive positions. Information that should have been impossible for an outsider to obtain. "How did you get classified intelligence from a village I've never visited?" Naruto's smile widened. "I have friends everywhere, Sasuke. People who owe me favors, people who trust me. People who believe in my vision of peace. This is espionage, this is treason, this is preparation." Naruto gestured toward the building below them where the cages were still arguing. "You think they don't have files on each other? You think they haven't planned for the day when diplomacy fails and they have to fight? At least I'm honest about it." Sasuke let the scroll fall from his hands. "You're planning to attack the villages. I'm planning to unite them, whether they cooperate willingly or not." Naruto's voice was calm, reasonable. "Think about it. No more border disputes, no more resource wars, no more children growing up as weapons because their village needs an edge. Just peace enforced by someone strong enough to make it stick. Enforced peace isn't peace, it's tyranny. Maybe, but it's also life, and I'd rather have 1 billion people living under tyranny than 1 million dying for freedom they'll never actually get. Sasuke activated his Chidori, electricity crackling around his hand. I won't let you do this. Yes, you will, Naruto didn't even flinch. Because deep down, you know I'm right, you've always known the system was corrupt, you just never had the power to do anything about it. Power isn't everything, isn't it? Naruto's chakra finally flared, and suddenly the air was thick with killer intent. But it wasn't wild or chaotic like it used to be. It was focused, controlled, precise. Power is the only thing that matters. Everything else is just pretty words people use to make themselves feel better about their helplessness. Sasuke lunged forward with his Chidori, but Naruto was already gone. He reappeared behind Sasuke, one hand resting almost gently on his shoulder. I don't want to fight you, Naruto said quietly. Join me instead. Help me build something better. Never. Sasuke tried to spin around with his sword, but Naruto caught his wrist with casual ease. Then stay out of my way. The temperature around them dropped as Naruto's chakra shifted, taking on a distinctly fox-like quality. Because the next time we meet like this, I might not be feeling so nostalgic. He released Sasuke and stepped back, his hands already forming a jutsu sign. Tell the others what you've seen here. Tell them what's coming. Maybe some of them will be smart enough to surrender before they have to be conquered. Naruto, but he was already gone, vanished into the night like smoke. Sasuke stood on the empty roof for a long time, staring at the spot where his best friend had been. The intelligence scroll lay at his feet, its contents damning in their precision and scope. This wasn't the hot-headed boy who'd promised to bring him back to Konoha. This wasn't the naive idealist who believed everyone could be saved with enough determination. This was someone else entirely. Someone cold and calculating and utterly convinced of his own righteousness. Someone who had to be stopped. Sasuke picked up the scroll and tucked it into his cloak. Then he formed his own jutsu signs and disappeared into the shadows, racing toward Hidden Cloud with a warning that might already be too late. Behind him, in the building below, the 5 Kage summit continued. None of the participants knew that their world had just changed forever, that the boy they'd all dismissed as a useful weapon had just declared war on everything they represented. But they'd learn soon enough. The announcement came 2 weeks after the 5 Kage summit. Tsunade stood before the gathered villagers in what remained of Konoha's central plaza, her voice carrying across the construction noise and scattered debris. Effective immediately, I will be stepping down as 5th Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Tsunade raised her hand for silence. My decision comes after careful consideration of our village's needs moving forward. We face unprecedented challenges, not just in rebuilding our physical infrastructure, but in adapting to a changing world where the old ways of doing things are no longer sufficient. Naruto stood to her left, wearing a clean version of his orange jacket. His face showed the appropriate amount of surprise, but anyone watching closely might have noticed how his eyes scanned the crowd, cataloging reactions. The person I'm recommending as my successor, Tsunade continued, has proven himself not just as a warrior, but as someone capable of making the hard decisions our village will need in the coming years. Someone who understands that leadership sometimes requires sacrificing personal comfort for the greater good. More murmurs. A few people were already nodding, putting the pieces together. Naruto Uzumaki has my full endorsement as 6th Hokage of Konohagakure. The reaction was immediate and divided. About half the crowd cheered. These were the people whose lives he'd directly saved, who'd seen him grow from outcast to hero. The other half looked uncertain, whispering among themselves. Naruto stepped forward and the crowd gradually fell silent. I know this is unexpected, he began, his voice carrying easily across the plaza. 3 months ago, I was just another ninja following orders, but everything changed when pain attacked our home. He paused, letting his eyes move across the faces in front of him, people he'd grown up with. People who'd shunned him, feared him, and finally accepted him. I've spent my whole life wanting to be Hokage, but I thought it was about recognition, about proving I was worth something. His voice dropped, became more intimate. I was wrong. Being Hokage isn't about personal glory. It's about having the strength to make decisions no one else can make, to bear responsibility no one else can bear. Scattered applause started in the crowd. I can't promise that every choice I make will be popular. I can't promise that change will be comfortable. But I can promise you this, never again will our village be caught unprepared. Never again will we lose people we care about because we were too weak or too divided to protect them. The applause grew stronger. Naruto had always been good at reading a crowd, but now there was something calculated about it. Something that suggested he knew exactly which emotional buttons to press. The world is changing whether we like it or not. We can change with it, or we can be left behind. I know which one I choose. As the crowd dispersed, chattering excitedly about their new Hokage, Naruto caught sight of familiar faces in the back. Sakura stood with Kakashi, both wearing expressions he couldn't quite read. Shikamaru was there too, his lazy posture not hiding the sharp intelligence in his eyes. They'd all grown up together, but Naruto suddenly felt like he was looking at them across a vast distance. The political maneuvering here is subtle but important. Naruto didn't just get lucky, he's been positioning himself for this moment since the pain attack. Tsunade's resignation isn't entirely voluntary, though she doesn't realize it yet. The Hokage installation ceremony was held 3 days later. Traditional robes felt strange after years of orange jackets, but Naruto wore them with quiet dignity. The hat was heavier than he'd expected. As he stood before the assembled crowd, taking the formal oath, Naruto felt something settle into place inside him. This was what he'd always wanted, the power to protect people, to make real change. The fact that he'd had to manipulate events to get here was irrelevant. Results were what mattered. I, Naruto Uzumaki, do solemnly swear to protect the Hidden Leaf Village and all its people, to uphold its traditions while adapting to necessary change, and to serve as Hokage until death or resignation releases me from this duty. The words felt like a cage closing around his old self. When he raised his head, the person looking out through his eyes was someone new. After the ceremony, well-wishers lined up to congratulate him. Most were genuine, but Naruto could pick out the ones who were just going through the motions. The shopkeepers who'd overcharged him as a child, the neighbors who'd whispered about him being a monster, the academy instructors who'd written him off as hopeless. They all smiled and bowed and called him Lord Hokage now. Naruto, Sakura appeared at his elbow as the crowd thinned out. Can we talk, privately? He nodded and led her to his new office, the same room where he'd pestered Tsunade for missions so many times. It looked different from behind the desk. This is really happening, Sakura said, settling into one of the chairs. You're actually Hokage. Surprised? A little. I always knew you'd get here eventually, but… She studied his face. You seem different lately, since the pain attack. People change when they lose someone important. Naruto's voice was neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. You should understand that better than most. Sakura flinched slightly. She'd lost people too, patients she couldn't save, friends who'd died on missions. But something about the way Naruto said it made it feel like an accusation. Losing Hinata was terrible, she said carefully, but she wouldn't want her death to change you into someone cold. Cold, Naruto leaned back in his chair, or focused, there's a difference, Sakura. I used to waste time and energy trying to save everyone, even people who didn't want to be saved. Now I prioritize. Prioritize what? Results, effectiveness. The greatest good for the greatest number. He pulled out a stack of papers from his desk drawer. Want to see what I've been working on? Despite her growing uneasiness, Sakura's curiosity got the better of her. She took the papers and started reading. The first document outlined a new mission assignment system based on statistical analysis of success rates and casualty reports. The second detailed restructuring of the Ninja Academy to focus more on practical skills and less on outdated philosophies. The third was a proposal for mandatory psychological evaluations for all active shinobi. These are, she struggled for words, comprehensive, necessary. We've been running this village on tradition and sentiment for too long. It's time to start making decisions based on data. Sakura flipped through more pages, her frown deepening. Some of these changes, they're pretty extreme. Mandatory loyalty oaths, restrictions on civilian ninja relationships, surveillance of known risk factors. Extreme situations require extreme measures. Naruto's voice remained calm, reasonable. The old system failed, Sakura. Pain walked through our defenses like they weren't there. How many more attacks like that can we survive if we don't adapt? But some of these proposals, they go against everything the village was founded on. Freedom, trust, the will of fire. The will of fire burned Hinata to ash. The words came out flat and final. Maybe it's time for something more practical. Sakura set the papers down with shaking hands. This wasn't the boy who'd promised to bring Sasuke home. This wasn't the ninja who'd rather break his arm than give up on a friend. This was someone else wearing Naruto's face. "I should go," she said, standing up quickly. "Congratulations on the appointment. I hope you remember who you used to be." After she left, Naruto sat alone in the Hokage's office, staring at the village through the window. Somewhere out there, Sakura was probably finding Kakashi, telling him about their conversation. They'd be worried. Maybe they'd try to stage some kind of intervention. Let them try. He had work to do. The first village council meeting under Hokage Uzumaki was scheduled for the following week. Naruto spent the intervening days reviewing personnel files, budget reports, and intelligence summaries. The more he learned about how the village actually functioned, the more disgusted he became. Corruption everywhere, nepotism in mission assignments, resources wasted on ceremonial nonsense while practical needs went unmet. It was a miracle they'd survived as long as they had. When the council convened, Naruto was ready. "Gentlemen, ladies," he said, taking his seat at the head of the table, "thank you for coming. I know some of you have concerns about my appointment, given my age and unconventional background." Murmurs of polite denial, but Naruto could see the truth in their eyes. Half of them still saw him as that demon brat who'd caused trouble in the market. The other half saw him as a useful idiot who could be manipulated. They were all wrong. "I want to address those concerns head-on," Naruto continued. "You're right to be worried. The old way of doing things clearly wasn't working. If it had been, we wouldn't have lost so many people to preventable disasters." Councilwoman Udatane shifted uncomfortably. "Lord Hokage, with respect, some losses are inevitable in our line of work." "Are they?" Naruto's blue eyes fixed on her with laser intensity. "Tell me, how many of those losses were due to intelligence failures? Poor resource allocation, political infighting that prevented effective coordination?" She didn't answer. "I've been reviewing our records," Naruto said, pulling out a thick folder. "In the past 5 years, we've had 17 mission failures that could have been prevented with better information sharing. 43 casualties that resulted from inadequate equipment because funds were diverted to traditional ceremonies, and 68 instances of qualified personnel being passed over for promotions in favor of candidates with better political connections." The room was dead silent. "But the most interesting thing I found," Naruto continued, his voice still conversational, "was the pattern of financial irregularities in certain council members' expense reports." Now people were starting to look nervous. Naruto opened the folder and pulled out specific documents. "Councilman Hamura, can you explain why you charged the village for 3 separate diplomatic dinners on the same night last month? Or why those dinners cost more than most families spend on food in a year?" Hamura's face went pale. "Those were legitimate expenses. Were they? Because I have receipts showing you were actually at a private gambling establishment that evening. An establishment, incidentally, that's owned by someone who's received several highly profitable construction contracts from this council." The silence stretched on. Naruto led it, watching as realization dawned on their faces. He wasn't the naive boy they remembered. He'd done his homework. "Now," Naruto said, closing the folder with a soft thud, "we can do this the easy way or the hard way. The easy way involves voluntary resignations, full cooperation with my reforms, and a commitment to serving the village's actual interests instead of your own. The hard way." He let the sentence hang in the air. "What exactly are you threatening?" Councilwoman Koharu's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking slightly. "I'm not threatening anything, I'm explaining consequences." Naruto's smile was thin and cold. "Corruption weakens the village. Weakness gets people killed. People like Hinata Hyuga, who died because we weren't strong enough or organized enough to protect her." He stood up, and something in his posture made everyone else instinctively lean back. "I won't let that happen again, whatever it takes." This is the turning point where Naruto stops pretending to be the same person he used to be. The corruption he's exposing is real, he's not wrong about the problems. But his methods for fixing them are starting to show his true nature. 3 of the council members resigned that night. 2 more submitted resignations the next morning, along with detailed confessions of their various misdeeds. The remaining members suddenly became much more cooperative with the new Hokage's initiatives. Word spread quickly through the village. Some people were pleased. Finally, someone was cleaning house, making the hard decisions that needed to be made. Others were more concerned. The old council system had been corrupt, yes, but it had also provided checks and balances on the Hokage's power. Naruto was replacing it with appointees who answered directly to him. "This is happening too fast," Kakashi said, standing in Iruka's apartment along with Sakura and Shikamaru. I've known Naruto since he was 12. This isn't how he operates. People change, Iruka said quietly, especially after trauma. You should have seen him after Jiraiya died. He was different than two. Different how? Harder, more focused. Like he'd decided that caring about people was a luxury he couldn't afford. Iruka stared out the window toward the Hokage building. I thought it was just grief. But maybe what? Maybe we've been watching him break for years and we just didn't want to see it. Shikamaru, who'd been silent through most of the conversation, finally spoke up. The intelligence reports he's been requesting. I've been processing them through my department. He's not just looking at our own village's security. The others turned to stare at him. He's been gathering detailed information on every major village in the 5 nations. Troop movements, defensive capabilities, political situations. The kind of information you'd need if you were planning. Planning what? Sakura's voice was barely a whisper. War? Before anyone could respond, there was a knock at the door. They all froze. Who would be visiting Iruka at this hour? The knock came again, patient but insistent. Iruka opened the door to find 2 AA Chenbu operatives in full gear. Their masks were blank, emotionless. Iruka Umino, Kakashi Hatake, Sakura Haruno, Shikamaru Nara, one of them said in a flat, mechanical voice. Lord Hokage requests your presence in his office. Immediately. It wasn't really a request. The Hokage's office felt different at night. Shadows pooled in the corners despite the oil lamps, and the portraits of previous Hokages seemed to watch with disapproving eyes. Naruto sat behind the desk, still wearing his ceremonial robes. He'd been working late. Stacks of papers covered the desktop, along with maps and what looked like architectural blueprints. Thank you all for coming, he said without looking up from his work. I know it's late, but I wanted to address some concerns that have come to my attention. The 4 friends stood in a loose line in front of the desk, none of them quite sure what to do with their hands. Concerns? Kakashi's voice was carefully neutral. About my fitness for office, about the changes I've been implementing, about whether I can be trusted with the responsibilities of leadership. Now Naruto did look up, and his blue eyes moved from one face to another. Legitimate concerns given my unconventional path to this position. Naruto, Sakura started, but he held up a hand. Let me finish. I understand why you're worried. The person sitting in this chair isn't the same person you knew 6 months ago. You're right about that. The question is whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. He stood up and walked around the desk, positioning himself directly in front of them. Close enough to touch, but somehow seeming miles away. The old Naruto would have tried to solve every problem with friendship and determination. He would have believed that people are fundamentally good, that they just need the right motivation to do the right thing. He would have spent years trying to reform corrupt officials instead of removing them. He would have trusted enemies to keep their word and hoped allies would do their duty without supervision. Naruto's voice was calm, almost philosophical. That Naruto was weak, and because he was weak, people died. Hinata died believing in his weakness right up until the end. That's not fair, Iruka said, his teacher's instincts overriding his caution. You saved the village. You've saved countless lives. Have I? Or have I just delayed the inevitable while letting the real problems fester? Naruto's gaze fixed on his old teacher. How many more pain attacks could we survive? How many more missing nin like Sasuke can we afford to lose because we're too sentimental to take decisive action? What kind of decisive action? Shikamaru's voice was sharp with suspicion. Naruto smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. The kind that works. He walked back to his desk and picked up one of the papers. I've been in contact with our intelligence network. Do you know what I've learned? Every major village is preparing for war. Not maybe, not eventually now. They're building up troops, stockpiling weapons, forming secret alliances. The only question is who strikes first. So we prepare our defenses, Kakashi began. Defenses? Naruto's laugh was sharp and bitter. Kakashi-sensei, with all due respect, defenses are what you resort to when you're too weak to take the initiative. Do we wait for another pain attack? Another Orochimaru invasion? How many of our people die while we're sitting around hoping our enemies will leave us alone? The room fell silent except for the soft hiss of the oil lamps. There's another option, Naruto continued. We strike first. We unite the villages under a single leadership structure, ours. We eliminate the conditions that create conflicts in the first place. That's conquest, Sakura whispered. That's exactly what every tyrant in history has said to justify. Justify what? Creating peace. Ending the cycle of violence that's defined the ninja world for generations. Naruto's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his calm facade. Yes, it would require force. Yes, people would resist, but how many lives would it save in the long run? He walked over to the window, staring out at the village lights. I used to think there was nobility in struggle, in fighting for your beliefs even when you knew you'd lose. Now I think that's just another form of selfishness, prioritizing your own moral comfort over other people's lives. And if you're wrong, Shikamaru's question hung in the air like smoke. If your unified peace turns out to be just another form of oppression, Naruto was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. Then at least it will be my mistake, my responsibility, my guilt to bear. He turned back to face them, and for just an instant, he looked like the lonely child they'd all known. Better that than watching more people die because I was too afraid to act. Iruka stepped forward. Naruto, this isn't you. This isn't the person I taught, the person who what? Who believed everyone could be saved, who thought friendship could overcome any obstacle. Naruto's expression hardened again. That person was a fool, Iruka-sensei, an idealistic child who got people killed with his naivety. No, Iruka said firmly, that person was someone who gave people hope. Someone who proved that hatred doesn't have to define us. Hope. Naruto repeated the word like it tasted bitter. Tell me, Iruka-sensei, how much hope did Hinata have when she was bleeding out in my arms? How much hope do the families of everyone who died in the pain attack have when they visit empty graves? Before anyone could answer, Naruto walked back to his desk and pressed a button. The door opened, and the same two AA Chenbu operatives from earlier entered. Please escort our guests out, Naruto said without looking at his former friends and teacher. And make sure they understand that our conversation tonight was confidential. As they were led toward the door, Kakashi turned back. What happened to bringing Sasuke home? Naruto's hand paused over the papers on his desk. Sasuke made his choice. He chose power over bonds, isolation over connection. I'm simply learning from his example. That's not. Good night, Kakashi-sensei. Give my regards to the others. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Naruto alone in the office. For a moment, he sat perfectly still, staring at his reflection in the dark window. Then he picked up his pen and went back to work. The confrontation with his friends marks a crucial moment. Naruto is now fully committed to his new path, and he's cut ties with anyone who might make him doubt himself. The scary thing is how rational he sounds, even as he's planning something monstrous. 2 weeks later, Councilman Hamura was found dead in his study. The official report listed it as suicide, a single kunai to the heart, with a note confessing to years of embezzlement and corruption. But those who knew him said he'd never shown signs of guilt or remorse. He'd seemed more angry than ashamed about being exposed. Naruto attended the funeral, offering condolences to the widow and speaking movingly about the tragic consequences of losing one's way. He looked genuinely sorrowful, genuinely concerned for the family's welfare. But later that night, alone in the Hokage office, he pulled out a list of names. Councilman Hamura's name had already been crossed out. There were still 11 names left. Naruto picked up his pen and began planning his next move. Outside his window, the village slept peacefully, unaware that their beloved hero was methodically eliminating anyone who might stand in the way of his vision of peace. After all, you couldn't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. And Naruto Uzumaki was very, very good at breaking things. The Mizukage's private council chambers in hidden mist felt colder than usual, despite the braziers burning in each corner. Mei Terumi sat at the head of a circular table, her green eyes reflecting the dancing flames as she studied the intelligence reports spread before her. Are we certain about this? She asked, not looking up from the documents. Ao, her trusted advisor, nodded grimly. Our agents in the Leaf confirmed it. 3 more council members dead in the past month, all officially suicides, all leaving convenient confessions. And the village's response, that's the disturbing part. Most of the civilians seem pleased. They're calling it a cleansing of corruption, praising their new Hokage for having the courage to make hard decisions. Mei finally looked up, her expression troubled. What about the ninja? Mixed reactions. The younger generation seems energized by the changes. Better equipment, clearer mission parameters, higher success rates. But the veteran Jonin, Ao paused. Many are requesting transfers to other duties. Some have simply disappeared. Before Mei could respond, there was a soft knock at the chamber door. Chojuro entered, his usual nervous demeanor replaced by something more urgent. Mizukage-sama, we have a visitor. Sasuke Uchiha is requesting an immediate audience. Mei and Ao exchanged glances. Show him in. Sasuke looked older than his years as he entered the chamber. His clothes were travel-worn, his face gaunt from weeks of hard travel. But his eyes burned with the same intensity they'd always held, focused, determined, dangerous. "Mizukage-sama," he said, offering a brief bow. "Thank you for seeing me. Sasuke Uchiha, I hear you've been making quite a tour of the 5 nations lately." Mei gestured to an empty chair. "Sit, you look like you haven't slept in days." "Sleep is a luxury I can't afford right now." But he did sit, his hand never straying far from his sword hilt. "I assume you've been receiving reports about the situation in Konoha." "We have. Your former teammate seems to be making quite an impression as Hokage." Sasuke's jaw tightened. "He's not my teammate anymore, that person. Whatever's wearing Naruto's face now, it's not him." Strong words. Care to elaborate? For the next hour, Sasuke laid out everything he'd witnessed. The cold manipulation at the 5 Kage summit. The systematic elimination of political opposition. The intelligence gathering on foreign villages. The increasingly harsh policies being implemented under the guise of efficiency. "He's planning something," Sasuke concluded. "Something big. And if we don't stop him soon, we won't be able to stop him at all." Ao leaned forward. "You're asking us to believe that Naruto Uzumaki, the hero who defeated pain, who spent his entire life trying to protect people, has suddenly become a threat to the entire ninja world. I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm telling you what I've seen." Sasuke's Sharingan flickered to life briefly. "The question is whether you're smart enough to act on it." Mei studied him carefully. "And what kind of action are you proposing?" "A coalition. All 5 major villages working together to contain the threat before it spreads. Economic sanctions, intelligence sharing, maybe even a coordinated military response if necessary." "That's a big ask," Ao said. "You're talking about uniting villages that have been enemies for generations." "Exactly." Sasuke's voice was grim. "That should tell you how serious this is. I wouldn't be here if there was any other choice." Mei was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the table. "I'll need to consult with my advisors, and will want independent confirmation of these claims." "You won't have time for extensive deliberation. He's moving faster than you think." Sasuke stood up. "But I understand your caution. Just don't wait too long." After he left, Mei and Ao sat in silence. "What do you think?" she finally asked. "I think that boy has never lied to us before. And I think the intelligence reports we've been receiving paint a very disturbing picture." Ao rubbed his temples. "The question is whether we can trust the other cages to see it the same way. Send word to Hidden Cloud and Hidden Stone. Arrange a meeting if Sasuke Uchiha is right." Mei's voice trailed off. "If he's right, we're looking at another great ninja war, one that might destroy everything we've built." Meanwhile, in a small farming village on the border between Fire and Earth country, the reality of Naruto's new policies was becoming clear. The village of Tanagakure had always been peaceful. Too small to be considered a true hidden village, too isolated to be worth conquering, it had survived for generations by staying out of larger conflicts. The residents were farmers and craftsmen, not soldiers. That changed when the Konoha delegation arrived. "Citizens of Tanagakure," announced the lead ninja, a young woman with the leaf headband and dead eyes. "By order of the 6th Hokage of Konohagakure, this village is now under the protection and authority of the Hidden Leaf." The village elder, a man in his 70s named Kenji, stepped forward. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake. We're not affiliated with any major village. We've always been independent." "Independence is a luxury this world can no longer afford," the woman replied. "Bandits, missing nin, hostile villages, threats are everywhere. Only through unity can true peace be achieved." "But we don't have any threats here," Kenji protested. "We trade with everyone, fight with no one." "Why would we need?" The woman's hand moved faster than the old man could see. One moment he was speaking, the next he was on his knees, blood streaming from a precise cut across his forehead. "Because the Hokage says you do." Her voice never changed tone. "Now you can accept our protection willingly, or we can demonstrate why you need it. Your choice." The villagers stared in shock. These were supposed to be the good guys, the heroes from the Leaf Village who'd saved the world from pain. "What exactly does protection entail?" asked another villager, trying to keep his voice steady. "Standard rates. 40% of all agricultural output, 20% of crafted goods, and of course, any young people with ninja potential will be enrolled in our academy for proper training." 40%? Kenji struggled to his feet, still bleeding. "That's not protection, that's robbery. That's the cost of peace." The woman smiled, but it never reached her eyes. "Would you prefer the alternative?" As if summoned by her words, the rest of the delegation stepped forward. All young, all wearing the same dead expression, all radiating the kind of controlled violence that came from extensive training. The villagers looked at each other, seeing their own fear reflected in neighboring faces. They were farmers, not fighters. They had children to protect, crops to harvest, lives to live. We accept your protection, Kenji said finally, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Excellent. The tribute collectors will arrive at the end of each month. Failure to meet quotas will result in additional security measures. The woman turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and there will be no more trading with Earth Country villages. All commerce goes through Konoha now, for your own safety, of course. As the delegation departed, the villagers stood in stunned silence. In the span of an hour, their peaceful, independent community had become a vassal state. What have we done? Whispered one of the mothers, clutching her infant child. What we had to, Kenji replied, touching the cut on his forehead. What we had to. But even as he said it, he wondered if survival was worth the price they'd just agreed to pay. Deep within Naruto's mindscape, another conversation was taking place. The sewer-like tunnels of Naruto's subconscious had changed. What used to be a dank, oppressive maze was now something more organized, cleaner lines, better lighting, a sense of purpose and control. But the massive cage in the center remained the same, and behind its bars, Kurama watched his Jinchuriki with growing unease. You're not even trying to hide it anymore, the Ninetales said, his voice echoing through the mental space. The killing, the conquest, the systematic destruction of everything you used to stand for. Naruto appeared in the chamber, not as the child he'd once been, but as the man he'd become. His mental representation wore the Hokage robes, but his eyes held depths of cold calculation that would have terrified his younger self. Hide what? I'm bringing peace to the world. Ending the cycle of hatred that's defined ninja society for centuries. Naruto's voice was calm, reasonable. I thought you'd approve. Isn't this what you wanted? An end to the constant wars and bloodshed? Not like this. Kurama's massive form shifted, chains rattling. This isn't peace, brat. This is tyranny dressed up in pretty words. Is it? Tell me, how many people died in conflicts between villages last month? How many missing nin committed atrocities because there was no unified authority to stop them? How many children became orphans because their parents died fighting over resources and territory? The questions hung in the air between them. Since I became Hokage, those numbers have dropped significantly in areas under our protection. Yes, the methods are harsh. Yes, some people resist, but the results speak for themselves. Kurama was quiet for a long moment. You sound like every tyrant in history. They all believed they were saving the world. Maybe they were. Maybe the only difference between a tyrant and a hero is perspective. Naruto stepped closer to the cage. You've lived for 1,000 years, Kurama. You've seen how this cycle plays out over and over. Villages rise and fall, wars come and go, people suffer and die for the same stupid reasons generation after generation. Aren't you tired of it? Of course I'm tired of it. But this isn't the answer. Then what is? Naruto's facade cracked slightly, showing a glimpse of genuine pain underneath. I tried the old way. I believed in friendship and understanding and the power of never giving up. And what did it get me? Hinata died believing in those ideals. Sasuke turned his back on everything we built together. The village I saved treats me like a useful weapon instead of a human being. So you decided to become the weapon they always said you were. I decided to stop pretending I was anything else. Naruto's expression hardened again. At least weapons are effective. At least they get results. Kurama studied his Jinchuriki with ancient, knowing eyes. You know what the real tragedy is. You're still that same lonely kid who just wants people to acknowledge him. But now you've decided to force that acknowledgement instead of earning it. Earning it, Naruto laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. I saved this village more times than I can count. I ended wars, defeated gods, gave everything I had for people who wouldn't even speak my name. And you know what I earned? The right to watch someone I cared about die while they called me a monster behind my back. Hinata never called you a monster. No. She didn't, and now she's dead because I wasn't monster enough to protect her. The conversation died there, leaving both Jinchuriki and Tailed Beast trapped in their shared cage of regret and determination. What happens when there's no one left to conquer? Kurama asked finally. When the whole world bows to your vision of peace, what then? Naruto was quiet for a long time. When he finally answered, his voice was barely above a whisper. Then I'll finally be alone, just like I've always been. The mental conversation reveals the core of Naruto's transformation. He's not just seeking power, but trying to fill a void that can't be filled through domination. Kurama's resistance also sets up future plot points where the Nine Tails might actively work against Naruto. The rebellion started small. A merchant caravan refused to pay the new security taxes imposed by Konoha's expanding influence. 3 farming communities banded together and declared their independence from Leaf authority. A group of displaced samurai began attacking tribute collectors. Individually, these acts of defiance were insignificant. Collectively, they represented something Naruto couldn't tolerate, the idea that his vision of peace was optional. The response was swift and overwhelming. Naruto himself led the punitive expedition, accompanied by a hand-picked squad of his most loyal ninja. They moved with the kind of precision that came from extensive planning and absolute certainty of purpose. The first village fell in under an hour. "Please," begged one of the farmers as Naruto stood over him. "We have children here. Innocent people who just wanted to be left alone." "There are no innocent people," Naruto replied, his voice carrying easily across the burning fields. "There are only those who contribute to peace and those who threaten it. You chose to threaten it. By wanting to govern ourselves, by refusing to hand over half our crops to a village we've never even visited." Naruto crouched down until he was eye level with the farmer. "Do you know what happened to the last village that tried to govern itself? Bandits killed everyone over the age of 12 and sold the children as slaves. That's what independence gets you in this world, the freedom to suffer alone. That doesn't give you the right to." The farmer's words were cut off as Naruto's hand closed around his throat. Not tightly enough to kill, but tight enough to make breathing difficult. Rights are for people strong enough to enforce them. Everything else is just philosophy. Naruto's blue eyes seemed to glow in the firelight. "I'm offering you something better than rights. I'm offering you purpose, a chance to be part of something larger than your small, selfish little life." He released the farmer, who collapsed gasping. "Those who accept this offer will be relocated to areas where their skills are needed. Those who continue to resist," Naruto gestured to the burning buildings around them, "won't be given another chance to make the wrong choice." One of his subordinates approached. "Lord Hokage, we've secured the other 2 villages. Casualties were minimal, most surrendered once they saw what happened here." "Good. Have the able-bodied adults processed for relocation. Children go to the academy programs. Elderly and infirm can remain here under supervision. And the ones who fought back," Naruto was quiet for a moment, watching smoke rise into the night sky. "Examples need to be made. Choose 10 at random. Public executions in the village square tomorrow morning." "Sir?" The subordinate looked uncertain. 10 seems excessive. Most of them were just defending their homes." Naruto turned to look at him, and the subordinate immediately wished he'd kept his mouth shut. The person staring back at him wasn't the cheerful hero from the stories. This was something else entirely. "Are you questioning my judgment?" "No, sir, of course not. I just thought." "You thought wrong. Peace isn't built on mercy. It's built on the understanding that resistance leads to consequences too terrible to contemplate." Naruto's voice dropped to a whisper. "Those 10 people will die so that 1,000 others learn to live." The subordinate nodded quickly and hurried away to carry out his orders. Alone in the burning village, Naruto looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Sasuke was probably gathering allies, trying to build a coalition against him. Let him try. The other Kages were weak, divided, more concerned with their own petty interests than with the greater good. They'd learn just like these farmers had learned. One way or another, the world would understand that Naruto Uzumaki's peace was the only peace that mattered, even if he had to burn everything else to prove it. The transformation is complete. He's no longer the hero trying to save everyone, but the tyrant who believes some people need to die so others can live in peace. News of the village burning spread faster than wildfire. By the end of the week, every major ninja village had received reports of what the new Hokage was capable of when his authority was challenged. In Hidden Cloud, the Raikage called an emergency session with his advisors. In Hidden Stone, the Tsuchikage began mobilizing border defenses. In Hidden Sand, Gaara stared at intelligence reports with growing horror, remembering the boy who'd once saved him from his own darkness. And in a small inn on the border between Lightning and Earth Country, Sasuke read the same reports with a mixture of rage and bitter vindication. He tried to warn them. He tried to make them understand what Naruto was becoming. Now it was too late for warnings. Now there was only war. Sasuke folded the reports and tucked them away. Tomorrow he would continue his journey to Hidden Stone, where the Tsuchikage had finally agreed to meet with him. It was a start, not much of one, but enough to build on. The boy who'd once promised to bring his best friend home was now planning to stop him by any means necessary, even if it meant destroying them both in the process. Outside the inn, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled like the sound of approaching war. The world was about to discover what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object. And no one, not the villages, not the people, not even the participants themselves, would survive unchanged. The message arrived at Tsunagakure just before dawn, delivered by a single crow that landed on the kage windowsill and refused to leave until the scroll was taken from its leg. Gaara read it 3 times before the words truly sank in. To the 5 cages and all who claim authority over the ninja world, the old system has failed. Villages war against villages while the people suffer. Resources are wasted on pride and politics while children starve. Power is hoarded by the few while the many die protecting interests they'll never share. This ends now. I, Naruto Uzumaki, 6th Hokage of Kono Hagakure, hereby dissolve the current kage system and declare the formation of the United Ninja Federation under single leadership. All villages have 7 days to surrender their autonomy and accept integration into the new order. Those who comply will be treated with mercy and respect. Those who resist will be conquered. This is not a negotiation. This is an inevitability. Peace will come to this world, whether through cooperation or force is your choice. Gaara set the scroll down with trembling hands. Outside his window, Tsunagakure was just beginning to wake up, merchants opening their stalls, children running to the academy, guards changing shifts at the gates. A normal day in what had been, until this moment, a peaceful village. "Taimari," he called softly. His sister appeared in the doorway almost instantly, already dressed and alert. She'd never lost the habits of a ninja, even in times of peace. "What is it?" Gaara handed her the scroll without a word. He watched her face change as she read, confusion giving way to disbelief, then to cold anger. "He's lost his mind," she said finally. "Has he, or has he finally found it?" Gaara moved to the window, looking out at his village. "Look at what we've built here, Taimari. Peace, prosperity, hope for the future. And how long did it take? How many wars, how many deaths, how much suffering before we reached this point? You're not seriously considering. I'm considering everything." Gaara's voice was calm, but Taimari could hear the weight behind it. What if he's right? What if the only way to end the cycle is to break it completely? By conquering everyone who disagrees with him, that's not peace, that's tyranny. Maybe there's no difference anymore. Gaara touched the glass, his reflection staring back with tired eyes. Maybe we've been fooling ourselves, thinking we could change the world through example and patience. Before Taimari could respond, Kankuro burst through the door. "We've got problems," he announced, his face grim. "Our border scouts just sent word. There's a massive force moving toward us from the north, Konoha insignia moving fast." Gaara felt something cold settle in his stomach. How massive? At least 300 ninja. But that's not the worst part. Kankuro's voice dropped. He's leading them personally. The war council convened within the hour. Every senior Jonin in the village crowded into the Kage's chambers, their faces reflecting a mixture of determination and barely concealed fear. These were experienced fighters who'd survived the 4th Great Ninja War, but they'd never faced anything like this. "Intel suggests they'll reach our borders by nightfall," reported Baki, the village's chief strategist. "We have maybe 6 hours to prepare." "What are our options?" asked one of the Jonin. "Defensive positions around the village perimeter, evacuation of non-combatants to the underground shelters. Standard siege protocols." Baki's voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly as he spread maps across the table. "It's what we've trained for." "Have we?" Gaara's quiet question made everyone turn. "Have we trained to fight Naruto Uzumaki, the man who defeated Pain single-handedly, who has access to the Nine-Tails' full power?" The room fell silent. "I've fought beside him," Gaara continued. "I've seen what he's capable of when he's holding back. What do you think he'll do when he's not?" "So what are you suggesting?" Taimari's voice was sharp with frustration. "That we just surrender without a fight. I'm suggesting that we understand what we're facing." Gaara stood up, his pale eyes moving from face to face. "This isn't a political dispute or a territory war. This is a man with godlike power who believes he's saving the world, and the terrifying thing is, he might be right." Mutters of dissent rippled through the room, but Gaara held up a hand for silence. "I'm not saying we should surrender. I'm saying we should understand that if we fight, most of us are going to die, and we need to decide what we're dying for." An older Jonin named Yashimaru, not the original, but someone who'd taken the name in honor of Gaara's fallen uncle, stepped forward. Lord Kage, with respect, we're dying for our freedom, for our right to govern ourselves, for our children's future. Are we, or are we dying for pride? Gaara's question hung heavy in the air. Because if this is really about protecting people, then maybe the smart thing is to find a solution that doesn't involve a massacre. You want to negotiate with him, Taimari said. It wasn't a question. I want to try to reach him, the real him, underneath whatever he's become. Gaara moved to the window again, watching the sun climb higher in the desert sky. We saved each other once, he and I maybe. Maybe it's not too late to do it again. The decision to meet Naruto personally, away from the village, was perhaps the hardest choice Gaara had ever made. But if there was any chance of avoiding bloodshed, he had to try. They met at sunset in the Valley of the End, where the statues of Hashirama and Madara faced each other across the rushing water. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them, two friends who'd become enemies, whose conflict had shaped the ninja world for generations. Naruto stood on Madara's head, his red Hokage robes whipping in the wind. He looked older somehow, harder around the edges, but his blue eyes still held that familiar intensity. Behind him, the sky burned orange and gold, making him look like some vengeful deity. Gaara approached on foot, alone despite his advisor's protests. His sand moved around him in lazy spirals, but more from habit than any real sense of threat. Not yet anyway. Gaara, Naruto's voice carried easily across the valley. I wondered if you'd come. Did you, or were you hoping I'd just roll over and submit like those farming villages? Something flickered across Naruto's face, disappointment maybe, or regret. I was hoping you'd be smart enough to see what I'm trying to build. And what's that? A world where everyone lives in fear of your disapproval. A world where children don't grow up as weapons. Where people don't die over imaginary lines on maps. Where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them. Naruto jumped down from the statue, landing gracefully on the water's surface. Everything we talked about when we were kids, remember, peace that actually lasts. I remember a lot of things. Gaara stepped onto the water as well, his sand supporting him. I remember a boy who saved me from my own darkness, who showed me that hatred didn't have to define us. That boy was naive. That boy got people killed with his idealism. That boy saved the world. Multiple times. And what did it accomplish? Naruto's calm facade cracked slightly. Here we are, barely 2 years later, and the villages are already preparing for the next war. Nothing changed, Gaara. Nothing ever changes unless you force it to change. They were close enough now to see each other's faces clearly. Gaara was shocked by what he saw, not anger or madness, but a kind of cold certainty that was somehow worse than either. So you decided to become the thing we used to fight against. I decided to stop pretending there was a difference between heroes and villains. There's only power and the will to use it. Naruto's hand moved to his forehead, touching the spot where his headband used to rest. Do you know what the villagers called me after I defeated Pain? Hero of the Leaf. Do you know what they called me before that? The Nine-Tails Brat. Same person, same power, different circumstances. That's not. It's exactly true. People don't love heroes, Gaara. They love what heroes can do for them. The moment you stop being useful, you go back to being a monster. Naruto's blue eyes seemed to glow in the fading light. Well, I've decided to skip the middle part and go straight to being useful. Gaara felt his sand responding to his emotions, forming defensive patterns around him. What happened to you? What broke you so completely that you think this is the answer? Hinata died believing in me, in us, in the idea that people could change, that understanding could overcome hatred, that friendship was stronger than fear. Naruto's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. She died for a lie, Gaara, a beautiful, noble lie that got her killed. She died protecting what she believed in. That doesn't make it meaningless. Doesn't it? Tell me, what did her sacrifice accomplish? What changed because Hinata Hyuga gave her life for her ideals? Naruto stepped closer, and Gaara could feel the Nine-Tails chakra beginning to leak out. Nothing, absolutely nothing. The world kept spinning, the cycles kept turning, and another good person died for nothing. You're wrong. Am I? Then prove it. Show me what her death meant. Show me what all our struggles accomplished. Naruto gestured at the statues towering above them. These two had the same argument we're having now. They fought for the same ideals, made the same choices, and look how it ended. Brothers turned enemies, tearing each other apart while the world burned around them. It doesn't have to be that way, doesn't it? Because from where I'm standing, history looks pretty determined to repeat itself. Naruto's chakra flared brighter, red mixing with gold as the Nine Tails' power responded to his emotions. Unless someone has the strength to break the cycle once and for all, Gaara's sand rose around him like a protective cocoon. And you think you're that someone? I know I am. Because I'm the only one willing to pay the price for real peace. Naruto's form began to shift, the Nine Tails' influence becoming more pronounced. Join me, Gaara. Help me build the world we dreamed of when we were kids. Not like this, never like this. Naruto nodded slowly, sadly. I was afraid you'd say that. The battle that followed would be remembered as one of the most devastating single combats in ninja history. Two Jinchuriki at the peak of their power, two former friends driven to violence by irreconcilable visions of peace. Gaara struck first, his sand erupting from the riverbed in massive waves that should have been impossible to dodge. But Naruto wasn't dodging. He was moving through the attacks like they were barely there, his speed enhanced by the Nine Tails' chakra to inhuman levels. Sand tsunami, Gaara's voice echoed across the valley as tons of sand crashed down like a breaking wave. It was a technique that could level buildings, crush armies, reshape landscapes. Naruto caught it, not blocked, not deflected, caught. His hands, now wreathed in golden chakra, seized the leading edge of the sand wave and stopped it cold. For a moment that felt like eternity, the two forces strained against each other. Then Naruto smiled, and the sand scattered like dust in the wind. Is that all? He asked, his voice now carrying the deeper rumble of the Nine Tails. After all these years, is that the best you can do? Gaara's response was immediate and overwhelming. The entire landscape around them began to shift and flow as he called upon every grain of sand within miles. Mountains of it rose and crashed down, forming a maze of crushing walls and grinding surfaces designed to pulverize anything caught within. Desert layer, imperial funeral. The technique was meant to be inescapable, a three-dimensional trap that compressed from all directions simultaneously. Gaara had used it to end fights against multiple opponents in seconds. Naruto shrugged it off like an inconvenience. Tails of chakra sprouted from his back, first 4, then 6, then 8. With each tail, his power multiplied exponentially. The sand that should have crushed him was blown away by the sheer force of his chakra. You're not even trying, are you? Gaara realized with growing horror. This is you holding back. I don't want to hurt you, Naruto admitted, his voice now a harmony of human and fox. But I can't let you stand in my way either. Then don't. Gaara's sand began to take on a different quality, darker and more refined. If you want my village, you'll have to go through me, and I won't make it easy. For just a moment, Naruto's expression softened. I know you won't. That's what I've always respected about you, Gaara. You never give up even when you should. Especially when I should. They fought for another hour as the sun set and the moon rose, painting the valley in silver light. Gaara pulled every technique from his arsenal, the Shukaku's incomplete transformation, his ultimate defense, attacks that could have destroyed entire armies. None of it was enough. Naruto wasn't just stronger, he was fighting differently. Every move was calculated, efficient, designed to end the conflict with minimal damage to his opponent. He was treating this like a surgical operation rather than a battle. Why won't you fight me seriously? Gaara gasped, his chakra reserves running dangerously low. Why won't you give me the respect of a real fight? Because I still care about you, Naruto replied, and the admission seemed to hurt him more than any of Gaara's attacks. Because despite everything, I still remember the person who understood me when no one else did. Then stop this. Come home with me. We can find another way. There is no other way. Naruto's ninth tail manifested, and suddenly the air itself seemed to catch fire. There's only this, the choice between an ugly peace and a beautiful war. His final attack wasn't flashy or dramatic, just a single, precisely targeted blow that shattered Gaara's sand armor and sent him crashing into the valley wall. When the dust settled, the Kage lay motionless among the broken rocks. Naruto approached slowly, his tails receding as his chakra stabilized. Gaara was alive, barely but clearly defeated. His sand made weak attempts to protect him, but there wasn't enough chakra left to maintain even basic defenses. I'm sorry, Naruto whispered, kneeling beside his fallen friend. I'm sorry it had to be this way. Gaara's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Naruto's face with obvious effort. The village will be treated fairly. I promised you mercy and I keep my promises. Naruto's hand hovered over Gaara's forehead, where the kanji for love had been carved so many years ago. Your people won't suffer if they don't resist. And if they do, Naruto was quiet for a long moment, then they'll learn why resistance is futile. You really really believe this is the right thing to do. I have to believe it. Because if I'm wrong, Naruto's voice cracked slightly. If I'm wrong, then everything I've done, everyone I've hurt, it's all been for nothing. Gaara tried to speak, but his injuries were too severe. All he could do was watch as his childhood friend, his savior, his brother in all but blood stood up and walked away. Sleep now, Naruto said without turning around. When you wake up, the world will be different. Better, as he disappeared into the shadows, leaving Gaara alone among the ruins of their friendship, his final words drifted back on the desert wind. I promise. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Without their kage to lead them, Sand Village's defenses crumbled in less than 3 hours. The population was given a choice: integrate into the new order or face relocation to education facilities where they could learn to contribute properly to society. Most chose integration. The news spread across the ninja world like wildfire. The Sand Village, one of the 5 great nations, had fallen to a single man in a single day. The kage was missing, presumed dead. Konoha's forces were already moving toward their next target. In Hidden Cloud, the Reikage smashed his desk in half and began mobilizing every available ninja. In Hidden Mist, Mei called an emergency war council. In Hidden Stone, the Tsuchikage stared at intelligence reports and wondered if any of them were strong enough to stop what was coming. And in a small inn on the border between Earth and Lightning Country, Sasuke Uchiha read the reports with a mixture of rage and despair. He'd known this was coming, had tried to warn them, but somehow seeing it in black and white made it real in a way that mere possibility never could. His best friend, the boy who'd promised to bring him home, who'd never given up on anyone, had just conquered an entire nation. And from all accounts, he was just getting started. Sasuke folded the papers carefully and tucked them away. Tomorrow, he would continue his journey to Hidden Stone, where he hoped to find allies willing to stand against the coming storm. But tonight, he allowed himself a moment of grief for the friend he'd lost, not to death, but to something far worse. To certainty. Outside the inn, clouds gathered on the horizon, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like the sound of approaching war. The world was changing whether people wanted it to or not. And at the center of that change, a lonely boy who'd always wanted to be loved had decided that being feared was close enough. The meeting took place in an abandoned mining facility deep in Earth Country's mountain ranges, far from any village or major travel route. The location had been chosen for its isolation, but as Sasuke surveyed the assembled faces around the makeshift conference table, he wondered if isolation was enough. 3 cages sat before him, or rather, 2 cages and 1 very shaken village elder. The Reikage's massive frame dominated one end of the table, electricity still crackling faintly around his dark skin despite his attempts to remain calm. Across from him, the Tsuchikage Onoki looked every one of his advanced years, his usually sharp eyes dulled by the weight of recent events. The 3rd seat should have been occupied by Gaara. Instead, it held Abizo, the elderly Sand Village advisor who'd managed to escape during the conquest. His weathered hands shook as he poured tea none of them would drink. 24 hours, the Reikage said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to make the cave walls vibrate. That's how long it took him to completely subjugate one of the 5 great villages. 24 hours. Gaara was always too trusting, Onoki muttered, though the words lacked conviction. Should have struck first instead of trying to negotiate. Gaara was trying to save lives, Abizo's voice cracked with grief and exhaustion. He believed, we all believed that Naruto could be reasoned with, that somewhere inside that monster was still the boy who'd saved us all. Sasuke leaned forward, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering torchlight. There is no boy left. Whatever you're hoping to find, whatever you think you can appeal to, it's gone. I've seen what he's become. You're his teammate, the Reikage said, his brother according to the stories. If anyone could reach him, I tried. The words came out flat and final. At the 5 Cage Summit, I tried to make him see reason. Do you know what he did? He recruited me. Offered to make me his partner in reshaping the world, like it was a business proposition. The cave fell silent except for the distant drip of water from somewhere in the depths. What exactly are we dealing with? Onoki asked finally. I know the boy's power, but this level of systematic conquest, this isn't just raw strength, this is strategy. Sasuke pulled out a scroll and unrolled it across the table. The others leaned in to see a detailed map of the ninja world, marked with various symbols and notations. I've been tracking his movements and patterns for months. Sand Village wasn't random, it was chosen specifically because of its strategic value and defensive limitations. He's not just conquering territories, he's building an empire. Building toward what? The Hokage demanded. Complete unification, every village, every nation, every person under his direct control. Sasuke's finger traced lines across the map. Look at the pattern. First, he consolidated power in Konoha. Then he absorbed the smaller border settlements, cutting off trade routes and isolating the major villages. Sand was just the first domino. Who's next? Abizo whispered. Sasuke's finger stopped on the map. Stone Village, your defensive position makes you the logical choice for establishing a mountain stronghold. After that, probably Cloud, high altitude, defensible, good for launching operations against mist. The Hokage's chakra flared. Let him try, we're not some scattered farming communities or he stopped, realizing his words might offend Abizo. Or Sand Village, the old advisor finished bitterly. We thought the same thing, right up until our Kage was beaten unconscious and half our ninja were wearing leaf headbands by morning. How did he do it? Onoki's question was barely audible. How did he convert so many so quickly? He gave them a choice, Abizo said. Join willingly and keep your rank, your family, your life, resist and face re-education or worse. Most people aren't heroes, Lord Tsuchikage. Most people just want to survive. Cowards, the Hokage spat. Survivors, Sasuke corrected. And he's counting on that. Every village that falls makes the next one easier. Every person who switches sides is proof that resistance is futile. The Tsuchikage rubbed his temples. So what do you propose? That we band together and face him as united front? That's exactly what I propose. But not just us. Sasuke produced another scroll, this one containing names and locations. Every missing nin with a grudge against the established order, every small village that's managed to stay independent. Every person who values freedom over security. You're talking about allying with criminals and rogues, Onoki said. I'm talking about using every resource we have. Because make no mistake, this isn't a war between villages anymore. This is a war for the very soul of the ninja world. Before anyone could respond, a new voice spoke from the cave entrance. How touching. The great Sasuke Uchiha, reduced to hiding in caves and begging for scraps. Everyone spun toward the sound, weapons appearing in hands faster than the eye could follow. But the figure that stepped into the torchlight wasn't Naruto. It was Kabuto Yakushi, looking older and somehow more refined than when they'd last seen him. His white hair was neatly trimmed, his clothes expensive but practical. He looked like a wealthy merchant rather than a dangerous criminal. Kabuto, Sasuke's voice was ice cold. I should have known you'd crawl out from whatever hole you've been hiding in. Hiding, my dear Sasuke, I've been quite busy. Though perhaps not in the way you might expect. Kabuto's smile was as unsettling as ever. I represent certain interests who are very concerned about recent developments in the ninja world. What kind of interests? The Hokage demanded, not lowering his guard. The kind that prefer chaos to order. The kind that profit from conflicts between villages rather than unity under a single banner. Kabuto's eyes glittered with amusement. The kind that would very much like to see Naruto Uzumaki's little empire strangled in its cradle. We don't need help from criminals, Onoki said firmly, don't you? Tell me, Lord Tsuchikage, how many battles have you won recently? How many villages have you saved from conquest? Kabuto's voice remained pleasant, but there was poison underneath. Because from where I stand, your track record is rather disappointing. Sasuke stepped between Kabuto and the others. Say what you came to say and leave. Very well. My associates are prepared to provide intelligence, resources, and certain specialized services in exchange for a very reasonable fee. What kind of services? Despite himself, Sasuke was curious. Kabuto reached into his jacket and pulled out a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. Do you know what this is? No one answered. Synthetic Ninetales chakra, not very much, I'm afraid, but enough for experimental purposes. Kabuto's smile widened. You see, we've been studying your former friend for some time. His power source, his psychological triggers, his physical limitations. Fascinating subject. The cave erupted in shouts and accusations, but Sasuke held up a hand for silence. You're suggesting we use biological weapons against him. I'm suggesting you use every advantage available. Unless, of course, you prefer to face a god-level opponent with conventional methods and moral superiority. Kabuto tucked the vial away. But perhaps that's worked well for you so far. The moral complexity here is crucial. Sasuke and the others are being offered effective but ethically questionable tools to fight someone who's become a monster. This forces them to confront how far they're willing to go to stop Naruto. After Kabuto left, taking their non-committal response as permission to contact them again, the cave fell into heavy silence. "We can't trust him," the Reikage said finally. "Can we afford not to?" Onoki countered. "If he really has intelligence on Naruto's capabilities." "He's a snake," Sasuke said, "but he's a snake who wants Naruto stopped as much as we do. That makes him useful even if we can't trust his motives." Abizo looked up from his untouched tea. What would Gaara say? If he were here, what would he advise? The question hung in the air like a challenge. All of them had known Gaara, had respected his journey from monster to protector. His absence felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. "He'd say we have to be better than our enemies," Sasuke said quietly. "He'd say that becoming monsters to fight a monster means everyone loses." "Easy words when your village isn't the next target," the Reikage muttered. "My village was the first target. I watched him corrupt it from the inside, turn it into something unrecognizable." Sasuke's sharing flickered to life briefly. But Gaara would still be right. The moment we start using Naruto's methods is the moment we become what we're fighting against. "So what do we do?" Onoki asked. "Fight honorably and lose, or compromise our principles and win?" Before anyone could answer, a new commotion echoed from the cave entrance. This time it was one of their scouts, running at full speed with panic written across his face. "Lords, he's moving again, massive force heading straight for Stone Village." The Reikage was on his feet instantly. "How long do we have?" "Based on their current speed, maybe 18 hours. Onoki's face went pale. "My village, my people. We can get there first," Sasuke said, his mind already racing through possibilities. "If we leave now, travel light, we can reach Stone before he does. Set up defenses, evacuate civilians." "To what end?" Abizo's voice was hollow. "Sand Village had defenses. We had the Kage experienced Jonin, every advantage short of numerical superiority. It didn't matter. It'll matter this time, because this time he won't be fighting just one village." Sasuke looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "This time he'll be fighting all of us." The Tsuchikage straightened in his chair, some of his old fire returning. "You're proposing we make our stand at Stone Village?" "I'm proposing we make our stand everywhere. Turn his systematic conquest into a chaotic multi-front war. Force him to divide his attention, stretch his resources, fight on our terms instead of his. That's assuming we can coordinate effectively," the Reikage said, "and assuming our people will follow orders instead of running when they see what we're up against. They'll follow orders if their leaders give them something worth following." Sasuke stood up, his presence somehow filling the cave despite his relatively small stature. "Naruto's betting that we'll act like separate villages trying to protect separate interests. He's betting we can't work together because we never have before." "Can we?" Onoki asked. "I don't know. But if we can't, then we've already lost everything that matters." A flashback here serves to show what they're really fighting for, the relationships and bonds that Naruto has abandoned. As they prepared to leave the cave, Sasuke found himself remembering a different time. A training ground in Konoha, 3 kids and their sensei learning to work as a team. "Come on, Sasuke," Naruto's voice echoed across the years. "We can take him if we work together." They'd been facing Kakashi in their first real team exercise, hopelessly outmatched but too stubborn to give up. Separately, they were just academy students. Together. "I don't need your help," 12-year-old Sasuke had replied, already reaching for his kunai. "Yeah, you do, and I need yours. That's what teams are for, right?" It had taken them hours, but they'd eventually managed to corner their sensei through pure cooperation. Not skill, not individual strength, but the simple willingness to trust each other despite their differences. When had they stopped being able to do that? When had Naruto stopped believing it was possible? "Sasuke," the Reikage's voice brought him back to the present. "You're sure about this alliance? Once we do this, there's no going back. We'll be committed to total war." "We've been at war since the moment he conquered his first village. The only question is whether we fight it on his terms or ours." The Tsuchikage nodded slowly. "Then we fight. God help us all, we fight." As they filed out of the cave into the pre-dawn darkness, none of them spoke about the odds they faced. None of them mentioned the fact that even working together, they might not be strong enough to stop what Naruto had become. But each of them carried the same thought. If they were going to lose everything anyway, at least they'd lose it fighting for something that mattered. Behind them, the abandoned mine settled back into silence, its depths holding only shadows and the fading echoes of desperate plans. Ahead of them, the sky was beginning to lighten with the promise of a new day. The last day, perhaps, when the world would remember what it meant to choose freedom over security. Tomorrow, that choice might be taken away from all of them, but tonight, it was still theirs to make. Several hours later, in a mobile command post advancing toward Stone Village, Naruto reviewed intelligence reports with cold efficiency. Resistance forces converging on Stone Village, reported one of his lieutenants. Estimates suggest they'll arrive approximately 6 hours before we do. Expected, they're finally learning to coordinate. Naruto didn't look up from his maps. What about our other assets? 2nd and 3rd Division are in position to cut off retreat routes. 4th Division is maintaining pressure on Cloud Village's borders to prevent reinforcement. 5th Division continues pacification operations in former Sand territory. Casualties, minimal among our forces. Enemy losses, significant. Naruto finally looked up. I didn't ask for a euphemism. How many? The lieutenant swallowed nervously. Approximately 3,000 confirmed dead, sir. Another 7,000 missing or captured. And civilian casualties. We've maintained strict protocols regarding non-combatants, sir. Collateral damage has been kept to acceptable levels. Acceptable to whom? The question was quiet, almost conversational, but it made everyone in the command post tense. To the mission parameters, sir. Naruto went back to studying his maps. Double the medical corps assignments to conquered territories. Increase food distributions by 20%. I want reconstruction efforts accelerated. Sir, dead civilians don't contribute to the new order. Traumatized ones contribute poorly. Make sure they understand we're liberators, not conquerors. Yes, sir. And regarding the resistance forces at Stone Village, Naruto was quiet for a long moment, his finger tracing the mountain paths around the village. They're making their last stand. All of them, probably everyone who still believes the old way can work. His blue eyes seemed to glow in the lamplight. Let them throw everything they have at us. When they lose, when they see that even their combined strength isn't enough, the rest of the world will understand that resistance is futile. And if they don't lose, sir? The question came from a young Chunin, barely out of the academy. The kind of naive kid who still believed in heroes and happy endings. Naruto looked at him for a long moment, and something almost like sadness flickered across his face. Then I was wrong about everything. And maybe that would be for the best. But his hand moved to the sealed scroll at his belt, the one containing contingency plans that none of his subordinates knew about. Plans that ensured victory regardless of the cost. Plans that would make the Ninetales rampage 16 years ago look like a minor disturbance. He hoped he wouldn't need them. But hope, as he'd learned, was a luxury that leaders couldn't afford. The convoy continued its advance towards Stone Village, carrying with it the weight of an empire's ambitions and one man's terrible certainty that peace was worth any price. Even if that price was everything he'd once held dear. The defense of Stone Village began at dawn. Sasuke stood on the village's outer wall, watching the sun rise over the mountain peaks as final preparations were made below. Ninja from 3 different villages worked side by side, setting traps, reinforcing positions, evacuating the last of the civilians to underground shelters carved deep into the mountain itself. It should have been impossible. Cloud and Stone had been enemies for generations, their shinobi trained from childhood to view each other as threats. But desperation, it seemed, was a powerful motivator for cooperation. Final count puts us at just over 800 active combatants, reported Kitsuchi, the Tsuchikige's son and current military commander. Not counting the civilian militia, but civilian militia won't make a difference against what's coming, Sasuke finished. I know. From his position, he could see the approaching dust cloud on the horizon. Still hours away, but moving with the inexorable certainty of an avalanche. Somewhere in that cloud was Naruto Uzumaki, the boy who'd once promised to bring him home, now leading an army to destroy everything they'd once protected. Any word from the other fronts? Cloud Village reports constant pressure but no full assault yet. Same with Mist. He's keeping them busy while focusing his main force here. Kitsuchi's weathered face was grim. Smart strategy. Divide and conquer. It's what I'd do, Sasuke admitted. Hit the strongest defensive position first with overwhelming force. Break the coalition's will to fight. Reassuring. A new voice spoke from behind them. Actually, it is. Both men turned to find Kakashi approaching, his visible eye already showing the crimson of his Sharingan. Behind him came a small group of Konoha ninja, veteran Jonin who'd slipped away from the Leaf Village in the dead of night, unwilling to serve under their former students' increasingly tyrannical rule. Kakashi-sensei, Sasuke's voice held a mixture of relief and surprise. I wasn't sure you'd come. Where else would I be? My student needs help, even if he's too stubborn to ask for it. Kakashi's tone was light, but his eye was serious as it studied the approaching army. Both my students, actually. Naruto isn't your student anymore. He's something else entirely. Is he, or is he still that lonely kid who just wanted people to acknowledge him? Kakashi moved to stand beside Sasuke on the wall. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about where we went wrong. We didn't go wrong, he chose this path. Did he, or did we fail him so completely that this seemed like his only option? The question hung between them like smoke from a funeral pyre. I keep thinking about all the times he came to me for guidance, for understanding, and I was too busy or too wrapped up in my own problems to really listen. Sasuke was quiet for a moment. You think this is our fault? I think it's everyone's fault. The village that treated him like a monster, the system that taught him violence was the answer to everything, the friends who abandoned him when he needed us most. Kakashi's voice dropped. The teacher who should have seen what he was becoming and done something to stop it. Before Sasuke could respond, shouts erupted from the scouts positioned on the highest peaks. The army was closer than expected, moving faster than should have been possible for such a large force. And at its head, visible even from this distance, was a figure wreathed in golden chakra that made the morning sun look pale by comparison. He's not even hiding his power, Kitsuchi observed. That's either supreme confidence or psychological warfare, Sasuke finished. He wants us to see what we're up against. Wants us to understand how hopeless this is before the fighting even starts. The wall around them filled with defenders as the alarm bells began to ring. Cloud Ninja took positions alongside Stone Forces, their traditional enmity forgotten in the face of a common threat. Veteran Jonin stood next to fresh academy graduates, all united by the knowledge that this might be their last battle. Remember, Sasuke called out as the army drew closer, we're not trying to win. We're trying to survive long enough to prove that resistance is possible. Every minute we hold out is a victory. A young stone Chunin raised his hand. What about the Hokage himself? If someone could take him out. No one engages Naruto alone, Sasuke's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. He's beyond any individual fighter now. Our only chance is to work together, support each other. And his words were cut off as a familiar chakra signature separated from the approaching army, moving at impossible speed toward the village walls. Naruto was coming ahead of his forces, alone. The figure that landed on the outer wall barely resembled the boy Sasuke remembered. Naruto wore the traditional Hokage robes, but they'd been modified, reinforced with armor plates, marked with seals that pulsed with contained energy. His blue eyes held depths of cold calculation that would have been alien to his younger self. But the smile was the same. That confident, slightly reckless grin that had once meant everything would be okay. Now it meant something else entirely. Hey, everyone, Naruto said conversationally, as if he'd just arrived at a training session instead of a battlefield. Nice morning for it, don't you think? The wall erupted in shouts and the sound of weapons being drawn, but Naruto held up a single hand and somehow everyone fell silent. I want to make something clear before we start, he continued, his voice carrying easily across the defensive positions. I'm not here to destroy Stone Village, I'm here to save it. To save all of you from the system that's kept you trapped in cycles of violence and hatred for generations. By conquering us, the Raikage's voice boomed from somewhere to the left, by uniting us. By finally creating the peace that people like Hashirama and Jiroiya and his voice caught slightly, and Hinata died trying to build. Sasuke stepped forward, his hand moving to his sword. Hinata died protecting people from monsters like Pain. She wouldn't want this. Wouldn't she? Naruto's gaze fixed on his former teammate, and suddenly the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. She died because we were too weak and divided to protect her. Because the system you're defending failed everyone who ever believed in it. The system isn't perfect, but nothing. Naruto's chakra flared slightly, and several of the weaker ninja took involuntary steps back. How many more people have to die, Sasuke? How many more Hinatas? How many more Jiryas? How many more children turned into weapons because their villages need an edge? And your solution is to become the biggest weapon of all. My solution is to end the arms race permanently. To create a world where children can be children instead of soldiers. Naruto gestured at the assembled defenders. Look around you. Kids barely out of the academy, standing on a wall, preparing to die for the right of old men to play politics with their lives. Is this really what you want to preserve? Murmurs rippled through the ranks. Some of the younger ninja were nodding, uncertainty replacing determination in their eyes. He's right about the system, someone whispered. My little brother's only 12 and they're already talking about advanced combat training. Quiet, Kitsuchi snapped, but the damage was done. Seeds of doubt had been planted. Naruto smiled, and it was genuinely warm. I'm not asking anyone to die today. I'm offering a choice. Lay down your weapons, open the gates, and become part of something better. Help me build the world we all dreamed of when we were kids. Under your rule, Sasuke said flatly. Under unified leadership, yes, because the alternative is what we have now: endless war, endless suffering, endless cycles of revenge and hatred. Naruto's expression grew sad. I learned something when I defeated pain, Sasuke. I learned that even when you win, even when you save everyone, the system just keeps grinding on. Nothing really changes unless you force it to change. So you decided to become a dictator. I decided to become what the world needs instead of what it wants. Naruto stepped closer, close enough that Sasuke could see the pain hiding behind his cold certainty. Join me, help me finish what we started as kids, help me create real peace. For a moment, just a moment, Sasuke felt the pull of his old friendship, the memory of two boys who'd promised to understand each other, to never give up on their bond. Then he drew his sword. No. The battle that followed would be remembered as one of the most devastating single combats in ninja history, not just for its scope and power, but for its deeply personal nature. These weren't just two powerful shinobi fighting. These were brothers destroying each other. Sasuke struck first with Chidori, the lightning technique screaming through the air toward Naruto's heart. It was a killing blow, delivered without hesitation or mercy. Naruto caught the lightning in his bare hand. The Nine-Tails chakra wrapped around him like golden armor as he absorbed the electrical energy and redirected it into the ground. The stone wall beneath them cracked and crumbled, sending defenders scrambling for new positions. Really, Sasuke, we're starting with lethal force. Naruto's voice held genuine disappointment. I was hoping we could talk this through. We're past talking. Sasuke activated his Mangekyou Sharingan, the three-pointed star spinning as he prepared his most devastating techniques. Amaterasu! Black flames erupted around Naruto, the inextinguishable fire of the sun god designed to burn through anything and everything. For a moment, golden chakra and black flame warred against each other in a display of raw power that made the air itself shimmer. Then Naruto simply stepped out of the flames, his Nine-Tails cloak having absorbed and dispersed the technique like it was nothing more than a campfire. My turn, he said quietly. The assault that followed was unlike anything Sasuke had ever experienced. Not the wild, emotional attacks of their younger days, but precise, calculated strikes designed to disable rather than kill. Every blow was perfectly placed, every technique chosen for maximum psychological impact. Naruto wasn't just fighting him, he was demonstrating the futility of resistance. Shadow Clone Jutsu, hundreds of copies materialized around the village, each one possessing a fraction of the original's impossible power. Enough to overwhelm any group of defenders while the real Naruto focused on Sasuke. Rasengan, but this wasn't the technique Jiraiya had taught him. This was something evolved, refined, turned into a precision instrument instead of a blunt weapon. The sphere of chakra carved through Sasuke's defenses like they were paper, sending him crashing through 3 stone buildings before he managed to recover. Susanoo, Sasuke's ultimate defense, erupted around him, a massive skeletal warrior wreathed in purple energy. It was his strongest technique, capable of leveling mountains. Naruto shattered it with a single punch. You're holding back, Sasuke gasped, blood running down his face from a dozen cuts. Why are you holding back? Because I still care about you, Naruto admitted, and the admission seemed to hurt him more than any physical wound. Because despite everything, I still remember the person who understood me when no one else did. Then stop this, come back to us. We can find another way. There is no other way. Naruto's ninth tail manifested, and suddenly the air itself seemed to catch fire. I've tried everything else, Sasuke. Friendship, understanding, forgiveness, hope. I've tried it all, and it doesn't work. People don't change unless they're forced to change. Their battle had moved from the walls to the village center, leaving a trail of destruction that would take years to repair. Around them, the broader conflict raged as Naruto's forces engaged the coalition defenders, but neither combatant paid any attention to the larger war. This was personal. You want to know why I'm really doing this? Naruto asked as he caught Sasuke's sword barehanded, the blade stopping inches from his throat. It's not about peace. It's not about ending suffering. It's about control. What? I'm tired of caring about people who don't care about me, tired of saving a world that sees me as a monster, tired of hoping that friendship can overcome hatred when all the evidence says otherwise. Naruto's grip tightened, and cracks appeared in the steel blade. At least if I control everything, I won't have to watch the people I love die for ideals that don't work. The sword shattered. Sasuke stumbled backward, his primary weapon reduced to useless fragments. Around him, the sounds of battle were growing more distant as Naruto's forces systematically overwhelmed the defenders. They were losing, had been losing from the moment Naruto arrived. "It doesn't have to end this way," Naruto said, his voice almost pleading. "Surrender, join me, help me build something that actually works instead of clinging to something that never did." Sasuke's response was to activate every technique he had left. Chidori variants in both hands, Sharingan powers pushed beyond safe limits, chakra reserves burning like a candle flame in a hurricane. He lasted another 10 minutes. When it ended, he lay broken and bleeding in the rubble of what had once been Stone Village's market square. His chakra was exhausted, his technique spent, his body pushed far beyond its limits. Naruto knelt beside him, completely unmarked by their battle. "I'm sorry," he whispered, placing a hand on Sasuke's forehead. "I'm sorry it had to be this way. The village," Sasuke managed to croak out, "will be treated fairly. I keep my promises." Naruto's hand began to glow with medical chakra, stabilizing Sasuke's injuries. "You're coming with me, I'm going to fix you, help you understand what I'm trying to build." "I'll never," "You will. Because deep down you know I'm right, you've always known the system was broken." Naruto's voice grew distant, clinical. "I'm just going to help you see past the emotional attachments that keep you from accepting reality." As consciousness faded, Sasuke's last sight was of Naruto's face, still recognizable, still human, but empty of everything that had once made him worth saving. The boy who'd promised to bring him home had finally succeeded. But home, it turned out, was a cage. The aftermath of the battle was swift and decisive. Without their strongest fighters to rally around, the coalition's resistance crumbled within hours. The Raikage fought to the end, dying with lightning in his hands and curses on his lips. The Tsuchikage disappeared in the chaos, his fate unknown. Kakashi and the other Konoha defectors were captured and taken away for re-education. That evening, as fires burned in the conquered village and his forces established control, Naruto stood alone on what remained of the defensive wall. In his hands, he held the fragments of Sasuke's shattered sword. "Was it worth it?" The voice belonged to Kurama, speaking through their mental link. "Ask me when it's finished," Naruto replied without turning around. "And when will that be? When the whole world bows to you, when every free spirit has been broken to your will, when there's no one left to remember what you used to be." Naruto was quiet for a long moment, watching smoke rise into the darkening sky. "When there's peace, real peace, the kind that lasts. And if that peace requires you to destroy everything you once loved, then that's what it requires." The words came out flat and final. "Better a world that lives in fear of me than a world that dies for principles that don't work." In the distance, transport vehicles were already moving the captured resistance leaders toward facilities where they would learn to see things Naruto's way. Sasuke was in the lead vehicle, unconscious and restrained, heading toward a future that would either break him or remake him entirely. Either outcome was acceptable. Naruto let the sword fragments fall from his hands, watching them scatter in the wind like ashes from a funeral pyre. Tomorrow, he would begin planning the assault on Cloud Village. After that, mist would fall. Then the smaller nations, the hidden settlements, the last pockets of resistance. One by one, they would all learn that freedom was a luxury the world could no longer afford. And maybe, when it was all over, when every person alive lived under his protection and guidance, he would finally be able to sleep without dreaming of dead friends and broken promises. Maybe then, the loneliness would finally end. Even if he had to be alone with 8 billion people to achieve it. Behind him, the conquered village settled into occupied silence, its people learning their first lesson about life under the new order. Resistance was futile. Hope was dangerous, and the hero they'd once celebrated had become something far more terrifying than any monster they'd ever faced. Something that believed it was saving them. The refugee camps outside Hidden Cloud Village stretched for miles in every direction, a sprawling testament to the collapse of the old world order. Tents and hastily constructed shelters housed the survivors from Stone Village, Sand Village, and dozens of smaller settlements that had been liberated by Naruto's expanding empire. Mei Terumi walked through the camps at dawn, her green eyes taking in the faces of the displaced, ninja and civilians alike, all united by loss and the growing certainty that their world was ending. Children who should have been playing with toys clutched kunai instead. Parents who'd once worried about normal things like homework and chores now planned escape routes and discussed which family members were expendable if they had to run again. The latest reports came in an hour ago, said Chojuro, falling into step beside his Mizukage. His usual nervousness had been replaced by something harder, more focused. War had a way of burning away everything except what mattered most. 3 more border settlements have surrendered without a fight. They're calling it voluntary integration. Smart of them. Dead martyrs don't protect their families. Mei paused at a medical tent where Cloud Village healers worked alongside refugees who'd once been enemies. How long do we have? Intelligence suggests his main force is still consolidating control over former stone territory. Maybe 2 weeks before he's ready to move on us. Maybe less. Mei nodded, watching a former stone Jonin teaching basic defensive jutsu to a group of children from various villages. Their headbands were different, their techniques varied, but they learned together because they had to. You know what the strangest part is, she said quietly. He's not wrong about everything. Look around, former enemies working together, sharing resources, protecting each other's kids. If it wasn't happening because we're all terrified of the same threat, it might actually be beautiful. You're not having second thoughts, are you? Every day. But then I remember what happened to Gaara, to the Reikage, to everyone who thought they could reason with him. Mei's chakra flickered with barely contained heat. There's a difference between unity through cooperation and unity through conquest. They continued their circuit through the camps, noting the way people looked at them, not with the old mixture of respect and distance that cages used to inspire, but with desperate hope. These people weren't looking at political leaders anymore. They were looking at the last thin line between freedom and subjugation. The weight of that responsibility was almost unbearable. In the hidden detention facility 300 miles away, another kind of reckoning was taking place. Sasuke woke to the sound of dripping water and his own labored breathing. The cell was small, clean, and utterly secure, carved from solid rock with seals that prevented chakra use. Not a prison in the traditional sense, but a place designed for contemplation and eventual conversion. "You're awake," said a familiar voice from the shadows beyond the bars. "Good, we have a lot to discuss." The figure that stepped into the lamplight was one Sasuke recognized, but had hoped never to see again. Sai stood there in his modified Chenbu gear, his artificial smile as unsettling as ever. "Sai," Sasuke's voice was hoarse from disuse. "Let me guess, you're here to explain why joining Naruto is the logical choice." "Actually, I'm here to understand why you haven't made that choice already." Sai pulled up a simple wooden chair and sat down, his pale hands folded neatly in his lap. "From a purely analytical perspective, your continued resistance is puzzling. Puzzling how? You've seen the results of his methods. Decreased casualty rates in conquered territories, improved resource distribution, elimination of border conflicts. By every measurable metric, his approach is succeeding." Sai tilted his head slightly. "Yet you persist in opposing someone who's achieving the same goals you once claimed to support." Sasuke leaned back against the stone wall, studying his former teammate. Something was different about Sai. His usual robotic demeanor seemed more pronounced, as if he'd retreated further into emotionless analysis. "What happened to you?" Sasuke asked instead of answering the question. "I adapted. When Naruto took control of root operations, I was given a choice: serve the new order or be eliminated as a security risk. I chose service." "And you're happy with that choice?" For the first time, Sai's smile flickered. Just for an instant, but Sasuke caught it. "Happiness is inefficient. I focus on functionality instead." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters." Sai stood up, smoothing his uniform. "You have visitors tomorrow. People who want to help you understand what we're building here. I suggest you listen to them." As he turned to leave, Sasuke called after him. "Sai, when you dream at night, do you dream about painting?" The pale young man stopped walking but didn't turn around. "I don't dream anymore," he said quietly. "Dreams are counterproductive." After he left, Sasuke sat in the dim light and thought about adaptation, about the price of survival, about how easy it would be to simply stop fighting and accept the new reality. The scary part wasn't that Naruto's way might be wrong. The scary part was that it might be right. Meanwhile, in the deepest parts of Naruto's consciousness, a very different conversation was taking place. The mindscape had changed again. What had once been organized tunnels was now something that resembled a fortress: clean lines, efficient design, everything serving a specific purpose. But at its heart, the cage remained the same. Behind the bars, Kurama paced with growing agitation. "You're losing yourself," the Ninetales said without preamble as Naruto's mental projection appeared. "Whatever's left of the real you is disappearing bit by bit. The real me was weak. The real me let people die because he was too afraid to make hard choices." Naruto's mental form wore military dress instead of the Hokage robes, his posture rigid with acquired discipline. This version gets results. This version is becoming something I don't recognize. And that's saying something. I've been alive for 1,000 years, seen every kind of monster the world can produce. Kurama's red eyes fixed on his Jinchuriki with ancient intensity. But I've never seen anything quite like what you're becoming. And what's that? A monster who genuinely believes he's a hero, the most dangerous kind. Kurama stopped pacing, his massive form pressing against the bars. At least the others knew they were evil. You've convinced yourself that every atrocity is justified, every life you destroy is for the greater good. Because it is. Every person who dies fighting me prevents 10 deaths from the conflicts that would have come later. Every village I conquer eliminates a potential source of future wars. Every justification you make pushes you further from who you used to be. Kurama's voice grew softer, almost sad. I remember the boy who cried when he thought his friends didn't care about him, who'd rather break his own arm than give up on someone he loved. What happened to him? He grew up. He learned that caring about people who don't care about you is a form of self-destruction. Naruto's mental projection began to flicker, showing brief glimpses of the lonely child he'd once been. He learned that being loved is less important than being effective. And if I told you that your friends do care, that Sasuke fought you so hard because he was trying to save you, not stop you, I'd say that their caring doesn't change the mathematical reality of the situation. Emotions are luxuries for people who don't bear ultimate responsibility. Kurama was quiet for a long moment, studying his Jinchuriki with growing unease. You know what I think? I think you're terrified. Of what? Of admitting that you might be wrong, that all this conquest, all this suffering you've caused might have been unnecessary. The Nine-Tails' voice was gentle now, the way it had been during Naruto's darkest moments as a child. I think you're so afraid of facing that possibility that you'd rather destroy the whole world than risk being the villain in your own story. The mindscape shuddered, cracks appearing in the fortress-like walls. I'm not wrong, Naruto said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. I can't be wrong, because if I'm wrong, then Hinata died for nothing. Gaara suffered for nothing. Everything I've done, everyone I've hurt, would be mistakes you could still fix if you stopped, if you chose to be better instead of choosing to be right. The projection of Naruto began to fade, retreating from the conversation like he'd retreated from so many others. It's too late for that, I've come too far, done too much. The only way forward is through. Naruto, but his Jinchuriki was already gone, leaving Kurama alone in the cage with his growing certainty that something had to be done. Something that would either save his host or destroy them both. 3 days later in his cell, Sasuke was meditating when he heard something impossible. Sasuke. The voice came from inside his own head, deep, resonant, unmistakably inhuman. Sasuke's eyes snapped open, his body tensing despite the chakra-suppressing seals. Don't speak aloud, they're always listening, just think your responses clearly and I'll hear them. Who is this? Sasuke's mental voice was sharp with suspicion. Someone who's watched this situation deteriorate long enough, someone who remembers what Naruto used to be before he decided that love was weakness. Kurama. The realization hit Sasuke like a physical blow, the Nine-Tails. The same, and before you ask, yes, I'm betraying my Jinchuriki's trust. No, I don't feel good about it. But I also can't watch him destroy everything we used to protect. What do you want from me? Help. Naruto's lost himself so completely that he can't hear reason anymore. But you still remember who he was. You might be able to reach the part of him that's still human. I tried that. He broke every bone in my body and called it mercy. You tried to stop him. That's different from trying to save him. Kurama's mental voice grew urgent. He's planning something, Sasuke, something that goes beyond conquest. If he succeeds, there won't be anything left to save. What kind of something? There was a pause, and when Kurama continued, his mental voice was heavy with dread. He's been studying the infinite Tsukuyomi, Madara's technique for trapping the entire world in an illusion of peace. Naruto thinks he can improve on it, create a genjutsu that doesn't just trap people in dreams, but rewrites their personalities to eliminate conflict permanently. Sasuke felt cold despite the warm air in his cell. That's not possible. The chakra requirements alone, he has me, and he's been collecting tailed beast chakra from the other villages he's conquered, with enough power and the right jutsu modifications. Kurama's voice trailed off. He could turn every person alive into a willing puppet. No more war, no more suffering, no more resistance. Just 8 billion people who genuinely believe they're happy while he controls their every thought. My God. He thinks it's mercy, the ultimate expression of his love for humanity, taking away their capacity for evil by taking away their capacity for choice. There was pain in the Ninetales' mental voice. I've tried to reason with him to show him what he's becoming, but he's constructed such an elaborate justification for his actions that he can't see past it anymore. What do you need me to do? Escape. Gather whoever's left. Find a way to stop him before he completes the technique. Kurama paused. And if you can't stop him, then you need to be ready to kill him, because the person he's become isn't someone who can be saved. The mental connection began to fade, leaving Sasuke alone with the weight of impossible knowledge. Kurama, wait, how do I escape from here? The seals, the guards, leave that to me, but be ready to move when the opportunity comes. And Sasuke, remember who we're trying to save. Not the conqueror, not the tyrant, but the boy who used to cry when his friends were hurt. That boy might be dead already. Then we bury him with honor, but we don't let his corpse destroy the world. That night in the Hidden Cloud Village's war room, the final desperate plans were being made. Mei stood before a table covered with maps, intelligence reports, and increasingly desperate contingency plans. Around her, the last free leaders of the ninja world tried to find some way to stop the unstoppable. He's not moving as fast as we expected, reported one of the Cloud Jonin. Our spies suggest he's consolidating power in conquered territories instead of pushing forward with new attacks. That's worse, not better, said Darui, the Cloud Village's military commander. It means he's confident enough in his victory to take time perfecting his control. When he does move against us, it'll be with absolute certainty of success. What about the resistance cells in occupied territories? Asked a mist representative. Eliminated or converted, he's not just conquering people, he's changing them, making them genuinely believe that his way is better. Mei rubbed her temples. It's not a conventional occupation. It's cultural transformation on a massive scale. Brainwashing, Darui said bluntly. Is it? Because the reports we're getting suggest that people in conquered areas really are happier. Crime rates have dropped to almost zero. Resource distribution is more efficient. Children are safer, families are more stable. At the cost of freedom. Is freedom worth dying for if you don't get to enjoy it? The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. These were people who'd built their entire lives around the concept of choice, of the right to determine their own destiny. But they were also people who'd watched friends and family die in conflicts that seemed increasingly pointless. There's something else, said one of the intelligence officers. We've been tracking unusual chakra signatures from the former Konoha territory. Something big is happening there, construction projects that don't match any military installations we know about. What kind of construction? The chakra readings suggest. Ritual sites, large-scale jutsu preparation areas, like he's planning something that requires massive power concentration. Mei felt ice form in her stomach. Show me? The intelligence officer spread out detailed surveillance photos and chakra analysis charts. The images showed construction on a scale that boggled the mind. Geometric patterns carved into entire mountainsides, arrays of sealwork that stretched for miles, architectural structures that seemed designed to channel and focus immense amounts of energy. This isn't military architecture, Mei said slowly. This is something else entirely. There's more. We've detected tailed beast chakra signatures at multiple sites. Not just the nine tails traces of power from all the tailed beasts. That's impossible. Most of the other Jinchuriki are dead or missing, unless he's found a way to extract and store their chakra without killing the hosts. Or, the officer's voice dropped, unless he's been collecting it from other sources. Battlefield remnants, residual energy from previous battles. The implications hit everyone in the room at the same time. He's not just planning to conquer the ninja world, Darui said. He's planning to reshape it completely. Before anyone could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the village. Emergency signals that meant only one thing: the perimeter had been breached. But not by an army, by a single figure moving through their defenses like they weren't there. Through the war room's windows, they could see him in the distance. A golden streak of light moving toward the village center at impossible speed, leaving a trail of unconscious guards in his wake. Naruto had come to deliver his final ultimatum personally. And this time, there would be no negotiations. As the assembled leaders prepared for what might be their last battle, none of them noticed the subtle changes in the chakra readings from their own hidden detention facility. Changes that suggested one very determined fox was keeping his word about providing opportunities for escape. The final act was about to begin, and nobody, not the defenders, not the conqueror, not even the ancient being orchestrating events from within a mental cage, knew how it would end. But they all understood that after tonight, the world would never be the same again. Either they would find a way to stop a god from remaking reality in his own image, or they would learn to live in the paradise he would create from the ashes of their resistance. The last sanctuary was about to fall. The only question was whether anything worth saving would survive its collapse. The explosion that rocked the detention facility came at exactly 2:47 a.m. when the guard rotation was at its most vulnerable point. To the security personnel, it looked like a catastrophic failure of the chakra suppression seals, a 1 in a million malfunction that somehow triggered a cascade collapse of the entire containment system. They had no way of knowing that deep within Naruto's mindscape. A very ancient and very angry fox had spent weeks learning every detail of the prison's construction, waiting for the perfect moment to act. Sasuke was ready when his cell door simply opened. No alarms, no dramatic escape sequence, just the quiet click of locks disengaging as the seals that had held him powerless suddenly failed. In the corridor beyond, he could hear similar sounds echoing from dozens of other cells as political prisoners, captured resistance fighters, and rehabilitation candidates found themselves suddenly free. "Move quickly," Kurama's voice whispered in his mind. "The failure will look accidental for maybe 10 minutes. After that, they'll realize what happened and lock down everything within 50 miles. Sasuke didn't waste time with questions. He moved through the facility like smoke, his chakra singing with relief at being unrestrained for the first time in weeks. Other prisoners were stumbling out of their cells, confused and disoriented, but Sasuke had a destination in mind. The weapons storage was 3 levels down, past guard stations that should have been impregnable. But the same system failure that had opened the cells had also disabled most of the facility's defenses. Doors stood open, security cameras showed only static, and the few guards who remained conscious were dealing with what appeared to be a facility-wide emergency. Inside the armory, Sasuke found more than just weapons. Intelligence files, prisoner records, and most importantly, detailed schematics of what Naruto was really building in the former Konoha territory. What he saw made his blood run cold. The construction wasn't just large-scale ritual preparation. It was a massive chakra collection and amplification array designed to channel the power of all 9-tailed beasts simultaneously. But the purpose wasn't destruction, it was transformation. A global genjutsu that would rewrite human consciousness itself. Found something interesting? Sasuke spun to find Kakashi emerging from the shadows, his visible eye already showing the Sharingan. The copy ninja looked older, thinner, marked by weeks of captivity and rehabilitation sessions. "Kakashi-sensei, I didn't know you were here." Sai's been very thorough in collecting Naruto's former allies. The theory is that we're either valuable assets to be converted or dangerous obstacles to be neutralized. Kakashi gestured at the files Sasuke was holding. "What did you find?" Sasuke handed over the schematics, watching his former teacher's expression grow increasingly grim as he studied the technical details. "This is," Kakashi's voice trailed off. "This is beyond anything Madara ever conceived. He's not just planning to trap people in illusions, he's planning to fundamentally alter human nature. To eliminate the capacity for conflict permanently. No more war, no more hatred, no more choice." Sasuke gathered up additional files, stuffing them into a weapons pouch. "Kurama says we have maybe weeks before he's ready to implement it." "Kurama?" Kakashi's eye widened slightly. "The 9 Tails is helping us. Apparently even ancient demons have limits to what they'll tolerate from their Jinchuriki." Before Kakashi could respond, new alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Not the general emergency signals from before, but specific security alerts that meant one thing: someone had realized this wasn't an accident. "Time to go," Kurama's voice urged in Sasuke's mind. "And take as many of the others as you can. We're going to need every fighter we can get." The escape became a running battle through the mountain facility as guards finally understood what they were dealing with. But these weren't the elite forces that had conquered villages. These were garrison troops, occupation specialists trained for crowd control rather than combat against desperate shinobi. Sasuke cut through them like a blade through paper, his pent-up rage finally finding an outlet. Behind him came a growing stream of freed prisoners, some injured, some barely coherent from their treatment, but all burning with the same desperate need for freedom. Kakashi fought beside him, his copied techniques flowing together in deadly combinations that reminded everyone present why he'd once been called the copy ninja. But it was the other prisoners who truly made the difference, men and women who'd lost everything to Naruto's conquest, finally given a chance to strike back. "The main exit's blocked," reported one of the freed stone Jonin as they regrouped in a storage area. "They've got heavy forces positioned at every obvious route." "Then we don't take the obvious routes," Sasuke said, studying the facility blueprints he'd memorized. "There's a waste disposal system that connects to the natural cave networks. Not pleasant, but it'll get us out." "What about after we're out?" asked a former Sand Kunoichi. "Where do we go? Every village is either conquered or under siege." Sasuke looked around at the assembled faces, defeated, desperate, but still willing to fight. These were the last free ninja in the world, perhaps the last people capable of stopping what Naruto was planning. "We go to where the fight is. Hidden Cloud is still holding out. If we can reach them, coordinate our efforts." "A few dozen escaped prisoners against an army," Kakashi's voice was skeptical. "Even with our combined skills, the numbers don't matter," Sasuke interrupted. "This isn't about winning a conventional war anymore. It's about reaching one person, showing him what he's become before he makes it impossible to turn back." "He's right," Kurama's voice spoke to all of them simultaneously, causing several prisoners to jump in surprise. "I can speak to each of you now that the suppression seals are down, and I can tell you that Naruto is not entirely lost. Not yet, but he's close, very close." "What do you mean?" Kakashi asked. "The technique he's preparing, it requires him to surrender his own humanity in the process, to become something beyond human emotion or attachment. If he completes it, there won't be anyone left to save." The group fell silent, absorbing the implications. "Then we stop him," said the Sand Kunoichi simply. "Whatever it takes. Even if it means killing him." The question came from a young leaf ninja who'd refused to serve under Naruto's new regime. Sasuke was quiet for a long moment, thinking about his former teammate, the boy who'd never given up on anyone, who'd believed friendship could overcome any obstacle. "If that's what it takes to save the world from what he's becoming." "Yes, there might be another way," Kurama said softly, "but it would require something from you that might be impossible." "What?" "Forgiveness, not for what he's done, but for what he's about to do. He's so consumed with guilt and self-justification that he can't see past his own actions anymore. But if someone could show him that redemption is still possible." Kakashi understood first. "You're talking about reaching the part of him that still cares about his friends, the part that's driving all of this madness." "Exactly, but it would mean getting close enough to him to have that conversation. And right now he's—" The Ninetales' mental voice was interrupted by the sound of explosions echoing from far above them. Not the controlled demolitions of their escape route, but the massive detonations that came with high-level combat. Someone was attacking the facility from outside. "We need to move," Sasuke said, leading the group toward the waste disposal entrance. Now, as they crawled through the narrow tunnels that would lead them to freedom, none of them spoke about what they'd heard echoing from above, the distinctive sound of Jinchuriki transformation, the roar of tailed beast chakra unleashed without restraint. Naruto had come for them personally, and from the sounds of it, he wasn't interested in recaptures. Meanwhile, 300 miles away, the final battle for Hidden Cloud Village was reaching its climax. Mei Terumi stood on the village's highest tower, watching the golden figure move through her defenses like a force of nature. Every technique she threw at him was absorbed, redirected, or simply ignored. Lightning-style jutsu passed through him harmlessly. Earth-style barriers crumbled at his touch. Even her most powerful water techniques evaporated before they could reach him. "Fall back to the secondary perimeter," she shouted to her forces, but the words felt hollow. There was no secondary perimeter that could hold against what Naruto had become. Below her, the battle raged across multiple fronts as Naruto's clones engaged the combined forces of Cloud and Mist. But these weren't the simple shadow clones of his youth. Each one possessed a significant fraction of his power, enough to match elite Jonin in single combat. The real Naruto, meanwhile, moved through the village like he owned it, because in a very real sense he did. This battle was just a formality, a demonstration of the inevitability of his victory. "Mizukage-sama," Chojuro appeared at her side, his usually nervous demeanor replaced by grim determination. "The evacuation's complete. All non-combatants are in the deep shelters." "Good. And our other preparations?" "Ready when you are, but—" he hesitated. "The casualties will be enormous, our own people included." Mei nodded, her hand moving to the seal on her chest, a modification of the suicide technique used by Hunter Nin, but amplified through her mastery of multiple elemental chakra natures. If Naruto took the village, he wouldn't find anything useful here. Better to die free than live as slaves, she said quietly. Before Chojuro could respond, the tower shook as something massive struck it from below. Cracks appeared in the stone walls, spreading outward like a spider's web. Naruto had arrived. He came through the floor in an explosion of golden chakra and pulverized concrete, his transformation more complete than anything Mei had seen before. 6 tails swayed behind him, each one radiating power that made the air itself shimmer with heat. "Mizukage," he said conversationally, as if they were meeting for tea instead of a final battle. "I have to say I'm impressed. Most villages surrendered by now. Most villages didn't have leaders with functioning spines," Mei replied, her own chakra beginning to flare as she prepared her most devastating techniques. "Spines are overrated. They tend to get people killed unnecessarily." Naruto stepped closer, and Mei could feel the Nine-Tails' killing intent pressing against her like a physical weight. "I'm offering you the same choice I offered everyone else. Surrender now and your people will be treated fairly. Continue this pointless resistance, and I'll be forced to demonstrate why that's a mistake. I've seen your version of fair treatment. Conquered peoples living in fear, children trained from birth to serve your vision, anyone who thinks differently disappeared in the night." Mei's hands moved through jutsu signs faster than the eye could follow. "I'll pass, so be it." What followed wasn't really a fight. Mei threw everything she had at him, lava techniques that could melt mountains, acid mists that dissolved steel, combination attacks that should have been impossible to survive. Each one was neutralized with casual efficiency, like an adult dealing with a child's tantrum. When her chakra finally ran out, she collapsed to her knees on the ruined tower, gasping for breath and staring up at the figure who'd barely been scratched by her assault. "You're strong," Naruto acknowledged. "Stronger than most. In another life, we might have been allies. In another life, you might have been worth following," Mei shot back. "But this version of you, this isn't leadership. This is cowardice dressed up as strength." Something flickered in Naruto's eyes, surprise, maybe, or pain. "Cowardice? You're so afraid of losing people that you've decided to control everyone instead of trusting them to make their own choices. That's not strength, that's the response of someone who can't handle the possibility of being hurt again." For just a moment, the golden chakra around Naruto wavered. His expression shifted, showing a glimpse of something vulnerable underneath the power. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "You don't know what it's like to watch everyone you care about die because you weren't strong enough, smart enough, ruthless enough to protect them. Don't I? I've lost people too, we all have. But I chose to honor their memory by protecting what they died for, not by burning it down and rebuilding it in my own image." The vulnerability disappeared, replaced by cold certainty once again. "Pretty words, but pretty words don't stop wars. They don't prevent suffering. They don't." His sentence was cut off as every communication seal in the village activated simultaneously, broadcasting an emergency message that made his blood run cold. "Lord Hokage, this is Commander Yamato at Detention Facility 7. We have a catastrophic security breach. All high-value prisoners have escaped, including Sasuke Uchiha and Kakashi Hatake. The facility is compromised. Repeat, all prisoners have escaped." The message continued, but Naruto was no longer listening. His mind was elsewhere, processing the implications of Sasuke being free, of his former sensei being loose with detailed knowledge of the chakra collection sites, of the Nine-Tails' recent silence in their shared mindscape. "Kurama," he whispered, and suddenly the golden chakra around him turned dark and violent. "What have you done? What I should have done months ago," the Nine-Tails' voice replied, no longer bothering to hide his rebellion. "I've given your friends a chance to save you from yourself." The tower exploded. Not from any technique, but from the sheer force of Naruto's rage as 6 tails became 7, then 8. His transformation deepened, becoming less human and more monstrous with each passing second. When the smoke cleared, Mei found herself trapped under fallen debris, barely conscious but still alive. Naruto stood in the center of the destruction, his form now barely recognizable as human. "Find them," he snarled to his approaching forces. "Find them and bring them to me, alive." "Sir," one of his commanders ventured carefully, "perhaps we should focus on securing the village first. The village is secured. They have nowhere to run, no allies left to help them, no hope of victory." 8 tails lashed behind him as he spoke, each one radiating enough power to level buildings. "But if they think they can interfere with what I'm building, they're about to learn exactly how wrong they are." As his forces dispersed to hunt for the escaped prisoners, Naruto stood alone among the ruins of his victory. Around him, Hidden Cloud Village burned, the last free settlement in the ninja world, finally brought under his control. But for the first time since he'd begun this campaign, victory felt hollow. Because somewhere out there, the people who still remembered who he used to be were planning to stop him. And despite everything he'd become, despite all the power he'd accumulated, despite his absolute certainty that he was saving the world, a part of him hoped they would succeed. The part he was about to eliminate forever when he completed his ultimate technique. The part that still remembered what it felt like to have friends who cared about him more than they feared him. The part that had to die if his vision of peace was ever going to become reality. In the distance, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and for the first time in months, Naruto Uzumaki allowed himself to wonder if he was making the right choice. The answer terrified him more than any enemy he'd ever faced. Because if he was wrong, if there really was another way, then everything he'd done, every life he'd taken, every friend he'd betrayed, every piece of his humanity he'd sacrificed, had been for nothing. And that was a possibility he literally could not afford to accept, even if it destroyed him in the process. The convergence happened at dawn, in the ruins of what had once been the Valley of the End. Sasuke stood where Madara's statue used to be. The stone face had been carved away, replaced by something that looked disturbingly like Naruto himself. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. Around him, the remnants of the free world had gathered. 43 ninja from 6 different villages, plus the escaped prisoners from the detention facility. It should have been a joke, less than 50 people against an empire. But these weren't ordinary fighters. These were the ones who'd refused to break. Intel confirms he's begun the final phase, reported one of the Cloud Jonin, studying chakra detection scrolls with grim intensity. The tailed beast energy is being channeled into the primary array as we speak. Mei, her left arm in a sling from her battle at Cloud Village, studied the tactical reports spread across their makeshift command post. How long do we have? Maybe 6 hours before the technique reaches critical mass. After that, the Jonin's voice trailed off. After that, human choice becomes an extinct concept, Sasuke finished. Everyone gets to be happy whether they want to or not. Kakashi looked up from his own set of intelligence files. There's something else. The technique requires a massive sacrifice of life force to initiate. Naruto's planning to burn through his own lifespan to power the initial activation. Suicide? Asked one of the former stone ninja. Transformation. He'll survive, but he won't be human anymore. The person we knew, whatever's left of him, will be gone forever. The group fell into heavy silence. Even if they stopped the technique, even if they somehow reached Naruto's humanity, the process itself might destroy everything they were trying to save. Then we don't let it get that far, Sasuke said simply. We hit him before he can begin the transformation sequence. With what army? Mei's question was blunt. His forces outnumber us 100 to 1. His personal power could flatten mountains, and that's assuming we can even get close to the ritual site. We don't need to win, Sasuke replied. We just need to delay him long enough for one person to get through. One conversation, one moment where he remembers what he used to believe in. And if he doesn't remember, if whatever's left of the real Naruto is too buried under all that power and certainty. Sasuke's hand moved to the sword at his side, not his original blade, which lay shattered in Stone Village, but a replacement forged from the fragments of weapons belonging to fallen comrades. Then we do what we have to do to save the world from what he's become. The assault began simultaneously across 4 different fronts, designed to split Naruto's attention and create the chaos necessary for a small team to reach the main ritual site. At the eastern approach, Mei led a diversionary attack against the outer perimeter defenses. Her remaining mist ninja fought alongside former enemies from Cloud and Stone, their combined techniques creating devastating combination attacks that tore through the first wave of defenders. Lava-style molten rock flow. Mei's jutsu turned the landscape into a river of fire, forcing Naruto's troops to fall back to higher ground. But even as they retreated, she could see more forces moving to reinforce the position. They're not even trying to hold the line, observed Chojuro, his Hiramekare cutting through enemy weapons like they were paper. They're just delaying us. Because they don't need to win, Mei replied, launching another wave of acidic mist at the approaching reinforcements. They just need to keep us busy while their master completes his work. The realization sent a chill down everyone's spine. They weren't fighting for territory or tactical advantage. They were fighting against time itself. Meanwhile, at the northern front, Darui led the remnants of Cloud Village in a lightning-fast strike against the chakra collection towers. These massive structures channeled tailed beast energy from across the continent, focusing it into the main ritual array. If we can take down even one tower, it might disrupt the whole network, he shouted over the sound of battle as his team advanced through heavy resistance. But as they reached the base of the nearest tower, they discovered the true scope of what they were facing. The structure wasn't just protected by guards, it was protected by former friends and allies who'd been converted to Naruto's cause. Darui-sensei, the voice belonged to one of his former students, a young kunoichi who'd always shown such promise. Now she stood between them and their objective, her eyes holding the glazed certainty of someone whose personality had been fundamentally altered. "I know you're confused," she continued, her voice unnaturally calm. "But Lord Hokage explained everything to us. You're suffering from a psychological condition that makes you unable to see the truth. We're here to help you." The battle that followed was heartbreaking. These weren't enemies in any real sense. They were victims, people who'd been robbed of their capacity for independent thought. Every technique had to be precisely controlled, every attack designed to disable rather than kill. It slowed them down, which was exactly what Naruto had counted on. At the southern approach, a mixed force of former prisoners led a desperate assault against the communication arrays that coordinated Naruto's empire. If they could blind his forces, create enough confusion. But they quickly discovered that the arrays were defended by Sai and a unit of modified AA Chenbu operatives. The pale young man moved through their ranks like a machine, his artistic techniques creating deadly ink constructs with mechanical precision. "Sai," Kakashi called out as he engaged his former student. "This isn't you. I know there's still something human left in there. Humanity is inefficient," Sai replied, his brush strokes creating a massive ink dragon that lunged toward Kakashi's position. "Lord Hokage helped me understand that. Emotions lead to poor decision-making. Attachments create exploitable weaknesses. Attachments also create reasons to live, reasons to fight, reasons to be better than what we are." Kakashi's Kappa techniques flowed together as he battled the ink constructs, but for everyone he destroyed, 2 more took its place. "Those are luxuries for people who don't bear ultimate responsibility," Sai said, and his voice was an exact echo of Naruto's cold certainty. "We serve something greater than ourselves now." But the real battle was happening at the ritual site itself, where Sasuke led a small strike team toward the heart of Naruto's power. The landscape around the main array had been completely transformed. What had once been forests and hills was now a geometric nightmare of carved stone and flowing chakra. Massive seal arrays covered every surface, channeling energy from distant sources into a central complex that pulsed with barely contained power. And at the center of it all, floating in a sphere of golden light, was Naruto. He looked like a god. The Nine Tails chakra wrapped around him like living flame, but controlled and refined to a degree that defied imagination. 8 tails swayed behind him as he manipulated the massive technique with casual precision, his blue eyes now holding depths of power that seemed to stretch into infinity. "He's beautiful," whispered one of the strike team members. "Terrible, but beautiful. Don't look directly at him," Sasuke warned. "The technique is already starting to affect anyone who gets too close. He's becoming something beyond human perception." They advanced through the outer defenses using every stealth technique they knew, but Sasuke had the growing certainty that they were being allowed to approach. Naruto could have stopped them at any time. Instead, he seemed to be waiting for them, waiting for this final confrontation. When they reached the inner chamber, Sasuke understood why. The ritual site was designed like an amphitheater, with Naruto at the center and viewing areas arranged around him. This wasn't just a technique, it was a performance. He wanted his former friends to witness his apotheosis. "Sasuke," Naruto's voice carried easily across the chamber, somehow audible despite the massive energies swirling around him. "I was wondering when you'd get here." "Stop this," Sasuke called back, activating his Mangekyou Sharingan to protect himself from the technique's influence. "You don't have to do this, there are other ways to achieve peace." "Are there? Because I've tried every other way I could think of." Naruto's form began to shift as the technique approached completion, his human features becoming more abstract, more divine. "Friendship failed, understanding failed, forgiveness failed. All the noble ideals that people like you cling to, they don't work, Sasuke. They never worked. They worked for us. They brought you back from darkness before, they can do it again. Can they? Look around you." Naruto gestured at the chamber walls, which suddenly displayed images from across his conquered empire. People going about their daily lives, working, learning, raising families, all of it peaceful, harmonious content. These people are happier than they've ever been, safer than they've ever been. Free from war, from hatred, from the endless cycles of violence that define their ancestors. Free from choice, Sasuke countered, free from the right to determine their own destiny. Destiny is overrated. Most people make terrible choices when left to their own devices. The ninth tail manifested behind Naruto as the technique reached critical mass, but they make excellent choices when they're guided by someone with the wisdom and power to see the bigger picture. Around the chamber, the other members of Sasuke's strike team were beginning to show signs of the technique's influence. Their expressions grew peaceful, accepting, as their capacity for resistance slowly dissolved. Only Sasuke remained unaffected, protected by his Sharingan and his absolute determination to reach his friend. "What about Hinata?" he asked desperately. "What about her choice to love you, to believe in you, to die for what she thought you represented?" For the first time, Naruto's transformation wavered. Pain flickered across his features, real human pain that cut through the divine certainty like a blade. "Don't," he whispered. "She chose to see the good in you even when everyone else saw a monster. She chose to stand up to pain even though she knew she'd die. She chose to love you without expecting anything in return." Sasuke stepped closer, ignoring the waves of power that threatened to tear him apart. "What does your perfect world do to people like her? People who choose love over logic, hope over certainty?" "It protects them from making choices that get them killed," Naruto said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "It eliminates them, because people like Hinata don't exist without the freedom to be foolish, to be brave, to be human." Sasuke was close enough now to see the tears running down Naruto's face, tears of golden chakra that hissed when they hit the stone floor. "Your perfect world would have prevented her from loving you at all. Maybe that would have been better, maybe she'd still be alive if... If what? If you'd been a different person, if the village had treated you better. If the world had been fair." Sasuke reached out, his hand passing through the golden energy field that surrounded his friend. "The world isn't fair, Naruto, it never was. But that's what makes the good things precious. They exist despite everything working against them." The ritual chamber began to shake as Naruto's control over the massive technique started to slip. The perfect geometric patterns cracked and shifted, energies that should have been flowing smoothly began to arc chaotically through the air. "I can't stop now," Naruto said, his voice breaking. "I've come too far, done too much. Everyone I've hurt, everyone I've conquered, it only means something if this works. If I create something better than what came before. It means something because you can choose to be better. Right now, in this moment, you can choose to remember what you used to believe in." Around them, the chamber filled with the ghosts of memory, images of Team 7 training together, of Naruto promising to bring Sasuke home, of two boys who'd sworn to understand each other no matter what the cost. "I remember," Naruto whispered. "I remember all of it, but remembering doesn't change anything. The world is still broken. People still die for stupid reasons. Nothing I believed in as a kid actually works in practice. Doesn't it?" Sasuke stepped fully into the energy field, accepting whatever consequences might follow. "I'm here, aren't I? Despite everything you've done, despite every reason I have to give up on you, I'm still here, still trying to bring my friend home." For a moment that lasted eternity, Naruto's transformation reversed itself. The tails faded, the golden chakra dimmed, and for just an instant he looked like the boy Sasuke remembered, lonely, frightened, desperate for someone to tell him he wasn't a monster. "Sasuke," he said, and his voice was purely human again, "I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to be anything other than what I've become. You start by choosing to try. One choice at a time, one moment at a time." Sasuke reached out, his hand finally making contact with Naruto's face. "You don't have to save the world all at once. You just have to decide that it's worth saving exactly as it is, flawed, chaotic, beautiful, and free." The technique began to collapse around them as Naruto's will wavered. Massive energies that had been carefully controlled suddenly ran wild, tearing at the structure of reality itself. In the distance, alarms sounded as the chakra collection network destabilized. But just as it seemed like Naruto might actually choose to stop, to abandon his terrible vision of enforced peace, something else spoke. Not Kurama, the Nine Tails had been conspicuously silent during this entire exchange. Something darker, something that sounded like Naruto's own voice but twisted with absolute certainty and cold logic. "You're being weak again, sentimental. This is exactly the kind of thinking that got Hinata killed." Naruto's eyes went wide as he realized what he was hearing. Somehow, in his quest to eliminate his own capacity for what he saw as destructive emotions, he'd created something worse than any tailed beast. He'd created a version of himself that was absolutely, utterly convinced it was right. "No," he whispered, but the golden chakra was already beginning to return, stronger than before. "No, I won't let you. You already have. We are what we chose to become when we decided that caring about people was weakness. And we're going to save them all, whether they want to be saved or not." The transformation resumed with terrifying speed as Naruto's darker self seized control of the technique. But this time, it wasn't Naruto's power driving it. It was his absolute conviction that he was a monster who deserved to be alone. And monsters, as he'd learned long ago, didn't need friends, they just needed to be useful. The final battle had truly begun. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, Sasuke wasn't sure which version of his friend he was really fighting. The one who wanted to save the world, or the one who wanted to destroy the part of himself that still cared about it. Either way, only one of them was walking away from this. The battle between two versions of Naruto Uzumaki played out across multiple planes of existence, physical, mental, and spiritual, while Sasuke stood helpless in the middle, watching his best friend tear himself apart. In the physical realm, the golden chakra had taken on a life of its own, forming techniques that no human mind should have been able to conceive. Massive jutsu erupted from nowhere, reshaping the landscape with each passing second. But these weren't Naruto's techniques. They belonged to the darker self that had seized control, refined through cold logic rather than emotional intuition. "Sasuke, get away from me!" The real Naruto's voice broke through the chaos, filled with desperation and genuine terror. "I can't control it anymore. It's using my power, but it's not. It's not me." The darker voice responded immediately, using the same vocal cords but carrying none of Naruto's warmth. "We are exactly who we chose to become. Stop fighting the inevitable." Sasuke watched in horror as Naruto's face literally shifted between expressions, one moment showing the frightened boy he remembered, the next displaying the cold certainty of something that had abandoned humanity entirely. "This is what happens when you try to excise parts of yourself instead of accepting them," Sasuke called out, his sharing and spinning as he tried to track the rapid personality shifts. "You created this thing by denying your own capacity for doubt," the darker Naruto laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "Doubt is weakness. Attachment is vulnerability. We learned this lesson when Hinata died in our arms, bleeding out because we weren't strong enough to protect her. Hinata died because she chose to protect someone she loved." Sasuke dodged a spear of golden chakra that carved through solid stone like paper. "That choice, that capacity for selfless love, that's what made her human. And being human got her killed," both versions of Naruto said simultaneously, their voices overlapping in a harmony of pain and certainty. Around them, the ritual chamber continued to collapse as the technique spiraled beyond anyone's control. But instead of dissipating, the energy was being absorbed by Naruto himself, turning him into something beyond the limitations of flesh and blood. This was what he'd planned all along, to become a living embodiment of enforced peace, powered by the chakra of all nine-tailed beasts and sustained by his own absolute conviction. Meanwhile, in the depths of Naruto's mindscape, another battle raged. Kurama found himself facing something he'd never encountered in 1,000 years of existence, a version of his Jinchuriki that felt no emotions whatsoever. The mental landscape had been transformed into a sterile, perfectly organized space. No more tunnels, no more cages, no more chaos. Just clean lines, optimal efficiency, and a cold perfection that made the ancient fox's skin crawl. "You've been unusually quiet," the darker Naruto observed, his mental projection wearing robes that seemed to be made of pure concept rather than fabric. "I expected more resistance from you." "I've been trying to figure out what you are," Kurama replied, his massive form coiled defensively in the center of the space. "You're not Naruto, not really. You're something he created to handle the guilt of his choices. I'm what he should have been from the beginning, efficient, logical, unencumbered by the emotional attachments that made him weak. You're what he fears he's become. A monster who justifies atrocities with good intentions." Kurama's red eyes blazed as he studied this aberration. "But you made one mistake in your perfect design." "What mistake?" "You kept me. And I remember what he was like before you existed." Before the darker self could respond, Kurama did something he'd never done in the entirety of his existence as a tailed beast. He opened his cage from the inside. The prison that had contained him for so long, first in Mina, then in Kushina, finally in Naruto, dissolved at his own command. For the first time since the Sage of Six Paths had created the tailed beasts, Kurama was completely, utterly free. "What are you doing?" The darker Naruto's perfect composure cracked slightly. "You'll destroy us both. The strain on his body without the cage to regulate our connection will probably kill him, yes. But maybe that's better than letting him become whatever you're trying to turn him into." Kurama's chakra began to flow freely through the mindscape, no longer filtered or controlled. "I'd rather die with the boy I've learned to respect than live with the monster you want him to be." The feedback was immediate and catastrophic. In the physical world, Naruto's transformation wavered as his body struggled to contain unregulated tailed beast chakra. Golden energy erupted from every pore, turning him into a living bonfire that threatened to consume everything within miles. But instead of losing control entirely, something unexpected happened. The real Naruto, the frightened, lonely, desperately loving boy who'd been buried under months of rationalization and guilt, suddenly had access to power that wasn't filtered through his darker self's rigid logic. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, he remembered what it felt like to be genuinely strong instead of just overwhelmingly powerful. "Kurama," Naruto's voice, purely his own now, echoed across the collapsing ritual chamber. "What have you done? Given you a choice," the Ninetales' voice replied, no longer coming from within Naruto's mind, but speaking directly to both Jinchuriki and everyone else present. "You can let that thing you created maintain control and complete your global technique, or you can take back your power and face what you've become." The darker self fought back immediately, trying to reimpose its sterile order on the chaotic energies now flowing freely. But without the cage to regulate the connection, it couldn't maintain the same level of control. "I can't," Naruto's human voice was filled with anguish. "If I take control now, if I feel everything I've done, everyone I've hurt, I'll go insane." "Maybe," Sasuke said, still standing in the middle of the energy storm despite the danger. "But at least you'll go insane as yourself, not as some emotionless thing wearing your face." Around them, the technique began to tear itself apart as two opposing wills fought for dominance. The chakra collection towers in the distance started to explode one by one as the network destabilized completely. But the conversation was interrupted by new arrivals. Kakashi burst into the chamber, followed by what remained of the strike teams from all four fronts. They were battered, exhausted, many of them injured, but they were alive and free. "The perimeters collapsed," Kakashi reported, his visible eye taking in the surreal scene before him. "Naruto's forces are in full retreat. Whatever's happening here, it's disrupting his entire command structure." "It's not Naruto," Sasuke replied without taking his eyes off his friend's writhing form. "It's what he created when he decided that caring about people made him weak." Mei stepped forward, her remaining arm raised to shield her eyes from the blazing chakra. "Can we help? Some kind of combined technique to break through?" "No," Naruto's voice, pain-filled but clearly human, spoke from within the energy storm. This is something I have to do myself." The darker self's response was immediate and vicious. "You're weak, you've always been weak. That's why everyone you care about ends up dead." "Maybe, but at least when they die knowing they were loved by someone who chose to love them." Naruto's physical form began to solidify as he fought to regain control of his own power. "Your version of peace doesn't have love in it. It doesn't have choice or growth or the possibility of being surprised by how good people can be when you give them the chance. Those things lead to suffering. They also lead to everything that makes life worth living." Golden chakra swirled around Naruto as he finally faced his darker self directly. "Hinata didn't die because she was weak or because I failed her. She died because she chose to love someone worth dying for. And if your perfect world eliminates that possibility, then it's not a world worth creating." The battle between his two selves reached its climax inside Naruto's mind. Not a physical confrontation, but a philosophical one, two incompatible worldviews fighting for dominance over the same heart. "You'll watch everyone else die too," the darker self said, its conviction wavering for the first time. "Sasuke, Kakashi, everyone who followed you here, they'll all die because you're too weak to save them properly. Maybe they will, but that's their choice to make, not mine." Naruto's voice grew stronger as he found solid ground beneath his feet, not the shifting sands of absolute certainty, but the bedrock of acceptance. "I can't control whether people live or die. I can't force them to make good choices or prevent them from being hurt. All I can do is choose to believe they're worth protecting exactly as they are." The darker self screamed as Naruto's acceptance of uncertainty began to dissolve its foundation of rigid logic. But it made one final attempt to maintain control. Then you choose to be responsible for every death that could have been prevented, every war that happens because you were too sentimental to impose real peace. Yes, I choose that responsibility, because the alternative is choosing to be God, and gods don't have friends. Naruto's form stabilized completely as he made his final decision. I'd rather be human and wrong than divine and alone. The darker self shattered like glass, its perfect certainty unable to survive contact with messy, complicated, beautiful human doubt. But the victory came with a terrible cost. The massive technique, deprived of the focused will needed to control it, began to collapse inward on itself. All the energy that had been carefully gathered and channeled was now seeking the path of least resistance, which happened to be straight into Naruto himself. "Everyone get back," Kurama's voice roared across the chamber. The backlash the explosion when it came, was visible from 3 countries away. When the light finally faded and the shockwaves stopped shaking the earth, Sasuke found himself lying in a crater that stretched for miles in every direction. Everything within the blast radius had been reduced to smooth glass, fused by temperatures that should have been impossible to survive. But somehow, impossibly, he was alive. They all were. A dome of golden energy surrounded the survivors, not the harsh, controlled power of Naruto's technique, but something warmer, protective. Powered by genuine love rather than enforced peace. At the center of the dome, Naruto lay motionless. His hair had gone completely white, and his face looked decades older than his actual years. The cost of containing and redirecting that much destructive energy had pushed his body far beyond its natural limits. But he was breathing. "Is it over?" Mei asked, her voice barely audible in the sudden silence. "It's over," Kurama's voice confirmed, though he sounded exhausted beyond measure. "The global technique is completely disrupted. The chakra collection network is destroyed. And the Empire? The Empire was built on the belief that their leader was infallible," Kakashi said quietly. "Without that certainty, without the technique enforcing loyalty, people will remember how to choose for themselves," Sasuke finished. He struggled to his feet and walked to where Naruto lay, kneeling beside his former teammate. Naruto's blue eyes opened slowly, focusing on Sasuke's face with obvious effort. Did I? His voice was barely a whisper. "You chose to be human instead of a god. That's all anyone can ask for." Naruto's laugh was weak but genuine. "Worst timing ever. I finally figure out who I want to be and my body decides to shut down." "You're not dying," Sasuke said firmly. "I won't let you. We didn't come this far just to lose you now." Always so stubborn, Naruto's eyes were already starting to close again. "Hey Sasuke, yeah, tell everyone, tell them I'm sorry for all of it. And tell them that maybe they were right about friendship being stronger than power. Tell them yourself when you wake up." But Naruto was already unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. Around them, the protective dome began to fade as the last of the redirected energy dissipated harmlessly into the atmosphere. For the first time in months, the world was quiet. No more global techniques reshaping reality. No more empire imposing its will on conquered peoples. No more godlike figure determining the fate of billions. Just a group of tired, battered people standing in the ruins of their friend's ambition, trying to figure out how to rebuild a world that had forgotten how to be free. It would take time, months, maybe years, to undo the damage that had been done. But for the first time since this whole nightmare began, it felt possible. Because the boy who'd once promised to never give up on his friends had finally learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is give people the freedom to disappoint you, even if it means watching them get hurt, even if it means accepting that you can't save everyone, even if it means choosing to be human instead of choosing to be right. In the distance, the sun was beginning to rise over a world that would have to learn how to choose its own destiny again. It wasn't going to be easy, but maybe, just maybe, it was going to be worth it. 6 months after the collapse of what historians would eventually call the Unification Wars, Sasuke found himself standing in a hospital room in the rebuilt Hidden Cloud Village, watching his oldest friend sleep. Naruto looked smaller somehow. The white hair that had come from channeling too much power was slowly returning to its natural yellow, but the lines around his eyes remained. He'd aged a decade in the span of minutes during that final battle, and some damage couldn't be healed with medical jutsu. "Any change?" Kakashi asked, entering the room with 2 cups of tea. "He stirred about an hour ago." Mumbled something about ramen. Sasuke accepted the tea gratefully. The doctors say his chakra pathways are still rebuilding themselves. It could be weeks before he wakes up properly. And when he does, that was the question everyone was asking, though few dared to voice it aloud. What did you do with someone who'd conquered half the world? How did you handle a war criminal who'd also saved everyone by stopping himself? That's up to him, Sasuke said finally. And up to the world to decide if they can forgive someone who genuinely wants to be better. Through the window, they could see the ongoing reconstruction efforts. Villages that had been forcibly unified under Naruto's empire were slowly reasserting their independence, but many of the administrative improvements remained. Trade routes stayed open, medical knowledge was freely shared, and former enemies continued to cooperate on projects that benefited everyone. It was messy, inefficient, and occasionally erupted into minor conflicts. In other words, it was perfectly human. Strange, Kakashi mused. Some of his policies actually worked. The irrigation systems in former Sand territory, the educational exchanges between villages, the shared intelligence networks. Because they were good ideas implemented by force instead of consensus. Take away the coercion, and people might choose to keep the parts that work. Sasuke sipped his tea, thinking about all the conversations he'd had with village leaders over the past months. It's going to take time, but I think we're building something better than what existed before. Better than the old system or better than Naruto's empire. Both, maybe. Ask me in 10 years. 3 days later, in a small farming community that had once been called Tanagakure, another kind of recovery was taking place. Kenji, the village elder, stood in his vegetable garden, watching children play in fields that had been scorched by war and slowly restored by patient hands. The occupation was over, but its effects lingered in ways both obvious and subtle. Elder San, one of the mothers, approached, her young son hiding behind her legs. Hiroshi had another nightmare. About the soldiers coming back. The soldiers aren't coming back, Kenji said gently, kneeling down to the boy's eye level. The man who sent them remembered that he used to be someone who protected children instead of frightening them. But what if he forgets again? It was a fair question. One that adults across the continent were asking in various forms. What if the peace they'd won was temporary? What if the next would-be conqueror was smarter, more ruthless, less likely to be reached by appeals to their humanity? Then we'll deal with it when it happens, Kenji replied. But in the meantime, we'll live our lives, grow our food, and raise our children to be brave and kind. That's all anyone can do. The boy nodded solemnly and ran off to join his friends. But his mother lingered. Do you really think he can be forgiven, after everything? Kenji was quiet for a long moment, watching the children play. During the occupation, these same kids had been marked for advanced training, turned into weapons before they were old enough to understand what war really meant. Now they were just children again. Laughing, arguing over game rules, making up stories about heroes and monsters. Forgiveness isn't about what he deserves, Kenji said finally. It's about what kind of people we choose to be. And I'd rather choose to believe people can change than spend the rest of my life afraid they can't. Meanwhile, in the ruins of what had once been the greatest chakra collection array in history, a different conversation was taking place. Gaara sat in his wheelchair, studying the smooth glass crater that stretched to the horizon. His injuries from the battle months ago had healed, but some damage to his spine remained permanent. He could still fight if necessary, but his days as a frontline combatant were over. You don't have to be here, Temari said, adjusting the blanket across his legs despite the desert heat. The reconstruction committee can handle the technical assessments without you. I need to see it for myself, Gaara replied, to understand what he was really trying to build. And in truth, the more he studied the ruins, the more impressed he became with the sheer scope of Naruto's vision. The technique wouldn't have just rewritten human consciousness. It would have eliminated war, poverty, and suffering on a global scale. The fact that it would have also eliminated choice, growth, and everything that made people human was the tragic flaw that had doomed it from the start. Do you think he knew? Temari asked. Deep down, do you think he understood what he was really doing? I think he understood exactly what he was doing. That's what made it so terrible. Gaara's sand shifted restlessly around his chair, responding to emotions he rarely showed. He wasn't a madman or a fool. He was someone who loved people so much that he was willing to destroy everything that made them worth loving. And now he has to live with the consequences of that love. Just like the rest of us have to live with the consequences of stopping him. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the glass wasteland that had once been the center of an empire. Tomorrow, they'd return to Hidden Sand to continue the slow work of rebuilding not just buildings and governments, but trust itself. It would take generations. Maybe it would never be complete. But it was work worth doing, because the alternative was giving up on the possibility that people could be better than their worst impulses. On a hill overlooking the medical facility where Naruto remained unconscious, another vigil was being kept. Kurama materialized in physical form for the first time in decades, his massive red form curled around the hilltop like a living mountain. The strain of maintaining independent existence was enormous, but he'd learned that some things were worth the cost. "Still nothing?" he asked as Sasuke approached. "Still nothing, but his chakra patterns are getting stronger. The doctors think he'll wake up soon." And then what? He can't go back to being Hokage. Hell, he can't go back to any position of authority. Too many people would never trust him again, no matter how much he's changed. Maybe that's for the best. Power was always what corrupted him. Sasuke settled cross-legged on the grass, gazing down at the hospital. He was strongest when he was just a ninja who wanted to protect his friends. Speaking of friends, what happens to us when he wakes up? The seal is completely broken. I could leave any time I wanted. It was a question that had been hanging between them for months. Kurama was finally free after centuries of imprisonment. He could go anywhere, do anything, live the life he'd been denied for so long. "Will you?" The Ninetales was quiet for a long moment. "You know what's funny? I spent 1,000 years dreaming of freedom, and now that I have it, I find myself caring about what happens to that knucklehead down there. Caring about whether he finds a way to live with what he's done. That's not funny, that's friendship. Is it, even after everything that happened between us? Especially after everything that happened, you could have let him complete the technique. Could have let him become that thing he created. Instead, you chose to save him from himself, even though it might have killed you both. Maybe I'm getting soft in my old age. Maybe you're finally understanding what Naruto was trying to teach you all along, that the connections we choose to maintain are what make us who we are." Before Kurama could respond, commotion erupted from the hospital below. Lights flickered on in windows, and they could see medical staff rushing toward Naruto's room. "He's waking up," Kurama said, his massive form already beginning to fade. "This should be interesting." When Naruto opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Sasuke's worried face hovering over him. "Hey," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "You look terrible. You look worse. White hair really doesn't suit you." Naruto managed a weak laugh, then winced as the movement sent pain shooting through his chest. "How long was I out?" 6 months, 2 weeks, 3 days. Sasuke helped him sit up carefully. "The world's been busy while you were sleeping. The Empire collapsed completely within hours of your technique failing. Turns out, when people remember they have choices, they tend to make them." Naruto nodded slowly, processing this information. "Casualties from the collapse, surprisingly few. Most of your forces just went home, started trying to figure out how to live normal lives again." Sasuke studied his friend's face. "You really don't remember the final battle, do you?" "Fragments. I remember you trying to reach me and something inside me that was wrong, cold, then everything gets blurry." Naruto's blue eyes met Sasuke's. "Did I hurt you? Did I hurt anyone else? You saved everyone. In the end, when it mattered most, you chose to be human instead of being right." Tears started running down Naruto's face, not chakra tears this time, just normal human sadness. "I remember now, all of it, everything I did, everyone I hurt. Gaara, the Reikage, those farming villages. Gaara's alive, paralyzed but alive and rebuilding Sand Village. The Reikage didn't make it. But his people are recovering." Sasuke's voice was gentle but honest. "You can't undo what happened, Naruto, but you can choose what to do next." "What I do next?" Naruto's laugh was bitter. "I'm a war criminal, Sasuke. I conquered half the world and killed thousands of people. What exactly am I supposed to do next?" "You're supposed to live, make amends where you can, accept responsibility for what you've done, and try to be better than you were. And if people can't forgive me, then that's their choice to make. But you don't get to decide for them by giving up or hiding away. You owe it to everyone you hurt to at least try to be worth the second chance you're being given." Before Naruto could respond, the door opened and Kakashi entered, followed by several other familiar faces. Former friends, former enemies, people who had every reason to hate him but had chosen to visit anyway. "Well," Kakashi said, his visible eye crinkling in what might have been a smile. "Look who decided to rejoin the land of the living." Mei stepped forward, her rebuilt arm still moving stiffly but functional. "We've been talking, all of us, about what comes next. For the world, for the villages, for you. I don't deserve Deserve has nothing to do with it, she interrupted. This is about what we choose to do, not what anyone deserves. Gaara's voice came from the wheelchair by the window. You spent months trying to force your vision of peace on everyone. Now you get to discover what voluntary cooperation actually looks like. I don't understand. Reconstruction, Darui said simply. The world's broken, and fixing it properly is going to take decades. We could use someone who understands large-scale logistics and has experience with impossible challenges. You want me to help rebuild what I destroyed. We want you to help build something better than what any of us had before, Sasuke said. Not through conquest or coercion, but through the messy, inefficient, beautiful process of people choosing to work together. Naruto looked around the room at all these faces, some forgiving, some still wary, all of them willing to give him a chance he wasn't sure he'd earned. I don't know if I can do it, be that person again, the one who believed in people. You don't have to believe in all people, Kakashi said. You just have to believe in these people. The ones who are choosing to believe in you despite everything. 1 year later, in the rebuilt village of Tanagakure, a small ceremony was taking place. The memorial was simple, a stone marker listing the names of everyone who died during the Unification Wars, regardless of which side they'd fought on. Naruto knelt before it, placing a wreath of flowers that he'd grown himself in the village's community garden. I know saying sorry doesn't bring any of you back, he whispered to the names carved in stone. But I want you to know that your deaths weren't meaningless. They taught me something I should have learned a long time ago, that the most important thing about having power isn't using it. It's choosing not to use it when using it would be easier. He stood up slowly, his body still bearing the marks of that final battle. His hair had returned to its natural color, but his face remained older, marked by experiences that had aged him beyond his years. Lord Naruto, he turned to find Hiroshi, the boy who'd once had nightmares about soldiers, now approaching with a handful of wildflowers. Just Naruto, please, I'm not a lord of anything anymore. Okay, Naruto. I picked these for the memorial. Mama said some of the people who died were trying to protect their families, like you were trying to protect everyone. Naruto accepted the flowers with shaking hands. That's very kind of you, Hiroshi. They're beautiful. Are you sad? Yes, but also hopeful, I think, because people like you remind me why it was worth stopping myself before I did something that couldn't be fixed. The boy nodded solemnly and ran back to his mother. Naruto added the wildflowers to the memorial, then walked back toward the village center where Sasuke was waiting with reports from the latest Reconstruction Committee meeting. How'd it go? Sasuke asked. Better than I expected. The irrigation project should be finished by harvest season, and 3 more villages have agreed to join the cooperative trading network. Naruto fell into step beside his friend. No coercion required. Imagine that. People actually like having choices about their own lives. Revolutionary concept. Naruto's tone was wry but not bitter. Speaking of choices, Kurama's been hinting that he might want to explore the world for a while. See what he missed during all those years of being sealed. And you'd be okay with that? I'd be sad, but yes, I'd be okay with it. He's earned the right to make his own decisions. Naruto paused. We all have. They walked in comfortable silence through the village streets, past children playing games that didn't involve warfare, past adults working together to build something lasting and good. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still problems that couldn't be solved with good intentions and hard work. But it was real, messy, human in ways that Naruto's enforced peace never could have been. Do you ever regret it? Sasuke asked as they reached the village edge, looking out over fields that stretched to the horizon. Stopping the technique, you could have created a world without suffering. I could have created a world without growth. Without choice, without the possibility of people surprising you by being better than you expected them to be. Naruto shook his head. No, I don't regret it. This world, with all its problems, is worth preserving exactly as it is. Even knowing that people will keep making mistakes. That there will be more wars, more suffering, more loss. Especially knowing that. Because the alternative is a world where Hinata's sacrifice would have been meaningless, where your choice to come after me wouldn't have mattered, where everything beautiful about being human gets erased in favor of artificial peace. As the sun set over the restored farmland, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, 2 former enemies stood side by side, watching the world continue to spin without anyone controlling its direction. It wasn't the ending anyone had planned for. But maybe, just maybe, it was the ending everyone needed. In the distance, children's laughter carried on the evening breeze, and somewhere in that sound was the promise that tomorrow would bring new choices, new chances to be better than today. The world had learned to be free again, and Naruto Uzumaki, former conqueror, former god, former monster, had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest act of love is trusting people to disappoint you. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they choose not to. 5 years after the Unification Wars, a new generation was growing up in a world that had learned from its mistakes without being paralyzed by them. In the rebuilt Hidden Leaf Village, a statue stood where the old Hokage monument used to be. Not of any single leader, but of interlocking hands representing the voluntary cooperation between villages that had replaced the old system of rivalry and competition. At its base, a simple plaque bore an inscription suggested by Naruto himself, in memory of those who died for the freedom to choose and in hope for those who will inherit that choice. Visitors often asked who had written those words, but the records were deliberately vague. Some said it was a reformed war criminal seeking redemption. Others claimed it was a collective effort by the reconstruction committees. The truth, as truth often was, lay somewhere in between. And in a small garden behind a rebuilt ramen shop, a man with prematurely white hair tended to vegetables with hands that had once held godlike power. Content now to help things grow rather than forcing them to change. He was no longer the hero of anyone's story, but for the first time in his life, that felt like enough. The world continued to turn, imperfect and beautiful and gloriously, chaotically free. And that perhaps was the greatest victory of all. What a journey! From the lonely kid who just wanted acknowledgement to the tyrant who nearly erased free will from existence, and somehow back to someone who learned that loving people means letting them make their own mistakes. Which moment broke your heart the most? That scene with Hinata's death that started it all, or watching Sasuke desperately trying to reach his friend through all that darkness? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts on these emotional gut punches. Subscribe if you want more stories that take your favorite characters to places you never expected, and tell me what other dark transformations you'd like to see explored. Until next time, stay curious and peace out.